The man in the iron armor asked the lady in front of him to be as careful as possible. The girl did not expect at all that they would meet again like this when she stood in front of the iron cage. Before her stood the one whom the whole empire loved and hated, and of whom, as a maiden, she was unrequitedly in love. Now the second prince, Ilidor Feuskadogan, was chained inside an iron cage. The girl realized that at that moment he looked too ragged for a man of noble blood. And the knights never found Ariadne. Manish and Ariadne are God's only love, and the former was closer to God than to man. And he possessed a special power. But he needed his companion, because that is how they immediately recognize each other and a fateful love arises between them. For Manish, who cannot live without Ariadne, love has been both a blessing and a curse. Be that as it may, the girl cannot be his true companion in life. She is just one of many candidates for the role of Ariadne. She had known for a long time that she could not become someone special to the prince. The heroine carefully touched Ilid's face and realized that she could alleviate some of his suffering. Suddenly, from the girl's touch, a bright glow appeared that was almost blinding. The entire cage was engulfed in sparks, and the knights behind the lady cried out, ordering them to flee. Suddenly, the iron shackles disappeared. The prince stood in place, holding the girl in his arms. He slowly began to open his eyes, trying to understand what had happened. And Lid called the girl by her name, wondering why she had come to him so late. The prince admitted that a little more, and he would have quickly killed them all on the spot. He asks Liana never to leave him alone again, and immediately touches his lips to hers. The girl remembered that when everything started, those days seemed very far away. The loud sounds of the music that marked the beginning emerge in my memory. A chandelier shining like the brightest summer solstice sun. There were many refreshments and all kinds of snacks in the room. And Liana Theodore was there, among the aristocrats, but only in the capacity of a maid. The girl compared the guests, dressed in bright colors and bejeweled, to peacocks. Suddenly, another lady appeared behind Liana and called her. Deborah Catton was amazed by the royal banquets, as they were even given a place to sit. Liana Theodore also did not expect the ball to be so luxurious. Deborah said that this is not the first time she's been taken to an event of this kind, because her mistress Natasha is very famous in secular society. Hearing her interlocutor, Liana looked at Lady Baldwin, who was already communicating with someone. For a moment, Natasha looked at Deodar, who simply looked back at her without understanding. Noticing the socialite's gaze, the maid thought she had done something wrong. Suddenly, Deborah shouted, realizing that Natasha was communicating with His Highness. The girl noticed how handsome the blonde prince looked even from a distance. His Highness is handsome enough to be the envy of the entire empire. Blushing slightly, Liana agreed with how handsome the blonde was. But before that, she had never experienced anything like this in her life and was not greedy for a person's appearance. But now Liana's gaze was fixed only on His Highness. Suddenly, Kato pulled her friend out of her thoughts and noticed how well and harmoniously the boy looked next to Lady Natasha. And it is very possible that the second prince took an interest in her Lady Baldwin. The bright platinum hair of the boy looked like sunlight, and Natasha's hair was like precious wine. Together, they looked like they were taken out of a picture. It was as if the most magnificent peacock at the ball had found its mate. But while Liana was lost in her pitiful thoughts, the prince watched her closely. Deborah became interested in why His Highness was looking in her direction like that. Theodora just looked away, covered in a slight blush. The moment Liana looked into his eyes, like blue glass beads, she got lost in thought. It seemed to her that all the windows in the hall suddenly opened, because a strong gust of wind was coming from somewhere, causing a strange feeling inside. Liana could not understand how her heart could beat so fast at an unknown feeling. But in the end, Prince Ilith left with Lady Natasha on his arms somewhere deeper in the hall. Late that night, the maids were near the carriage, wondering why His Highness was looking at them. Liana suggests that this look was just a coincidence, and that they have more urgent matters. The second prince was a man born in the golden age of the empire, and the young ladies themselves flew to him like moths to a flame. The maids wondered what would happen if His Highness and Lady Natasha really liked each other. They finally noticed that this magical couple was leaving the palace. His Highness Ili promised Lady Natasha to visit the Baldwin mansion. Both maids were very worried about the close communication between the boy and the lady. The two were already perfect lovers, if this was considered mere entertainment. Finally, His Highness informs Lady Natasha that he will send her an invitation. The prince kissed the lady's hand, admitting that he hoped her heart would make a decision not out of pressure, but out of true feelings. Liana, seeing such a scene, wondered if all womanizers are so unscrupulous. Suddenly, Prince Ilid briefly looked directly at the maid again. Liana turned away embarrassed, not understanding how she could catch the boy's eye again. Lady Natasha looked from behind the carriage curtain, announcing that she was expecting a letter from His Highness. Only after moving away from the palace could Liana breathe a sigh of relief, but she still couldn't understand how her face could shine like that. But at that moment, the girl could not take her eyes off Ilid. Suddenly, Liana was pulled out of her thoughts by Lady Natasha's voice, who decided to tell how the prince praised her dress. The girl immediately explained that she meant that His Highness said she was a competent maid. Liana admitted that she was flattered, but the reason the dress looks good is also due to the beauty of her interlocutor. Lady Natasha, after a brief silence, confirmed that this was so. The lady realized that Liana Theodore was smart and could keep her as a maid, because she would be obedient and try to please the aristocrat. Deciding to observe the maid, the girl began to talk about the fact that they were both daughters of commoners. But unlike the maid, Lady Natasha lives a different life only because she has a different father. Baldwin was only half aristocratic, and her mother took the place of countess only due to her beauty, which her daughter inherited. Knowing her humble origins, Natasha always asked this question before choosing a personal maid. Trying to answer correctly, Liana explained that she is she and a lady is a lady. Baldwin expected the answer to be more original, because the previous maid also answered that way. But Liana kept talking and admitted that she is happy with what she has and the life she lives. Feed your niece as you please and sleep together in a warm bed as much as she wants. The girl does not want to compare herself to other people, thus destroying the happiness she already has. The interlocutor began to drum her finger on the carriage sofa, recalling that Liana's niece was 8 years old. Smiling awkwardly, Theodore immediately confirmed the aristocrat's words. After that, a heavy silence reigned in their carriage, and Lady Natasha looked out the window, thinking. Returning to her interlocutor, she ordered Liana to come to her room starting the next day. Late that night, the girl returned to her room silently and realized that she had been promoted. Quietly approaching the closed door, Liana stopped in front of it, listening to the sounds. The girl suddenly opened the door and loudly called her awake niece. Phoebe Theodore, sitting on the floor with a book in her hands, awkwardly noticed her aunt's arrival. Liana reminded her of her request to go to bed early, pinching the girl's cheek. And then she also remembered the words that her niece should not read in the dark, because it would damage her eyes. The little girl admitted that she just wanted to surprise her aunt when she finished reading it. Liana looked at the book and realized that in her hands was an aristocrat's manual. Phoebe said that they threw it into an incinerator, so she picked it up and showed it to her. Liana was truly surprised that her niece could read this book so easily. The girl fell silent, realizing that Phoebe was an intelligent child. But now they had a problematic situation. If Angelica finds out about this, she will unleash all her anger on the baby. Liana knelt down, held out her little finger to Phoebe, and asked her to promise something. The girl asked never to tell anyone that she knew the language of the aristocrats. Phoebe understands that she cannot avoid it and will restrain herself because she is smarter. The girl praised her niece, called her smart, and asked her to be sure to keep it a secret. Both ladies touched their little fingers, sealing the promise. The next day, Cato cheerfully spoke that Liana Theodore was now Lady Natasha's personal maid. The girl said that she was very, very happy for her friend anyway. Suddenly, Liana shouted so loudly that Deborah turned around. Behind Cato was Angelica Baldwin, the eldest daughter of the family, whom the maid bumped into. The girl, frightened, began to apologize to the lady, hoping for a better outcome. But suddenly, a loud bang was heard that made the maid stagger. The maid began on her knees to apologize to her mistress for her reckless behavior. Liana realizes that they must behave as if they are not there, like invisible people who should not stand out. Even if the mistress scolds or criticizes a close colleague, he can only look. Angelica directed her attention to Liana and realized that she was Natasha's personal maid. Lady Baldwin approached and stroked the girl's chin, admitting that she was quite pretty. The aristocrat smiled, believing that Natasha had chosen Theodore to use her body when needed. Liana does not look up and begins to say something about the mistress she serves, when she is suddenly interrupted. Angelica does not immediately understand how an unfinished commoner can be called a lady. Liana reminds her that now that she is her personal maid, her ears are not only hers. She confidently asks if Lady Angela would mind if her words were passed on to Lady Natasha. The aristocrat immediately, dissatisfied, demands that her maid bring her a whip. As soon as the maid tried to object in some way, Lady Angela shouted at her to act faster. The lady believes that Natasha will be heartbroken because the maid she recently chose will suddenly disappear. Angela assures the maid that she managed to achieve everything only thanks to her face. When suddenly, the aristocrat hears her sister's voice behind her, to which she immediately turns around. Lady Natasha reveals that she assigned something for her maids to do, but they had been out for a long time. So she wondered what had happened. The aristocrat did not expect at all that her sister would hit her maids. Angela made the excuse that the maids do not know the basics, and that is why she is teaching them. And then she adds that if Natasha does not want to be like her mother, then she must continue her education. The lady remembers that everyone around her knows that her mother was a very intelligent woman. Lady Angela begins to realize that her sister is not ashamed of her mother. Natasha smiled, approached her interlocutor, and began to tell her what she once heard. They told her that it was immediately obvious that Lady Angela and Lady Natasha had different mothers. The blonde agrees with this because her mother has a great history. But Lady Natasha continues by saying that they are different from each other, from head to toe. And the main difference between them lies in mental capabilities. The lady shouted, and her sister was still talking about how they approached her with the question of how Angela couldn't even know the basic spelling of her kingdom's language. Kingdom. The girl began to tremble and blush with shame and anger towards her interlocutor. Lady Angela turned around, compared her sister to a child, and spoke about how unbearable she was. The girl mentally vows revenge on her interlocutor for such shame in the hall. Having dispersed, Liana calmly exhaled, realizing how timely Natasha had appeared. But due to an incident this morning, Deborah had to request a short vacation. As a result, Liana had to take on the responsibility of serving her mistress in the imperial palace garden. Standing outside, one of the maids approached Theodore and admitted how tough she was. Annie admired the confidence with which Liana could face Lady Angelica, despite the fact that they could have been fired. Liana claims that she was just telling the truth and that she really has nothing special. The girl sank, realizing that at that moment she had no choice but to do this. When Liana came face to face with Angelica, she could act more bravely. After all, she managed to see how Lady Natasha was watching this whole situation through the window. Theodore didn't care if she was whipped, because it would be an unbreakable proof that she would always be on her lover's side. Liana's main goal was to become Lady Natasha's personal maid, whom she would take with her after her marriage. The girl smiled, realizing that she should at least make things more comfortable for Phoebe. Liana decided to ask her interlocutor if she had seen Prince Ilid before. The girl admired how handsome His Highness was because she saw him for the first time, and then Annie pointed somewhere, inviting her interlocutor to look there. Prince Ilid was sitting in the garden, playing with Lady Natasha's hair and chatting pleasantly with her. The maid admired them, hoping that the boy would be more sincere with her. Liana did not expect less than this, because then she would work in the imperial palace. The embracing couple looked at the maids, discussing something among themselves. Lady Natasha noticed that her interlocutor kept looking at Liana, which made her think he was interested in the maid. But Prince Ilith just tucked the girl's hair behind her ear and explained that he wanted to compliment her because the maid had dressed the lady so beautifully. Lady Natasha immediately reminded him that he was the envy of the entire empire. Suddenly, the girl stood up silently from the bench and walked forward, closer to the flowers. She focused on the violets and pointed out that it would be better to plant brighter colored flowers. Lady Natasha picked one and realized how surprisingly strong it was. The violets immediately reminded the girl of her own maid Liana. Lady Natasha thought that Theodore was just a quiet child, but she knows when to show her claws. The girl regretted very much not having met her maid sooner. And then she became completely sad because after work, they would have to dismiss Liana. Suddenly, Lady Natasha's thoughts were interrupted by a voice, explaining to her that he didn't care if others envied him. Or not. After all, Prince Ilid does not like to envy other people at all. Suddenly, they changed the subject, and Lady Natasha asked if the boy really wanted to help her. Prince Ilid took his interlocutor's hand and explained how important she was to him. The boy asks to bring him some evidence, which makes the lady open her eyes wider. And then he will fulfill Lady Natasha's wish to destroy the Baldwin family. After a while, Liana looked at the map, trying to find the place she needed. The girl frowned, looked at the paper, and did not understand where she would have to go. Liana wandered through the corridors, hoping to find a guard so she could ask for directions. But suddenly, she noticed the Imperial Palace maids and decided that this could be her chance. Theodore explained to them that she was the Baldwin family maid and that she was lost. Suddenly, a voice behind the girls asked the name of the family Liana served. Prince Ilid himself appeared at the door that the Imperial maids were closing. The girl gasped, realizing that she was still in the Imperial Palace. Liana politely greeted the prince, but immediately they asked what she was doing in that place. His Highness assumed that Lady Natasha had sent the girl to him. Theodore quickly began to explain that she had just gotten lost on the way to the warehouse. Noticing Liana's gaze, the prince asked where she was looking, for which she immediately apologized. Because she was confused. The boy smiled, realizing that Theodore arrived just in time because he had an errand. His Highness smiled and demanded that his interlocutor choose clothes for him. Liana followed the boy, wondering for what occasion she would have to choose clothes. The interlocutor explained that it is necessary to choose an outfit for dinner that Liana's hostess likes. Theodore realized that it was about looking good in front of Lady Natasha. Liana is a maid to him, but not a woman, so it is not surprising that he is almost naked in front of her. The girl said that her owner likes a man's clothes to look clean and tidy. Upon hearing the question about what kind of men she prefers, Liana felt embarrassed. But she admitted that her tastes coincided with Lady Natasha's. After a couple of minutes, His Highness approached the girl with a new suit. Adjusting his sleeves, the prince asked if he looked too boring. Liana applauded and said how perfect her interlocutor looked. Looking at the silent prince, the girl realized that he probably didn't like it. Trying to think of something, the maid started looking around. Suddenly, she called the prince and offered him a small jewel in her open palms. The girl carefully placed the decoration on His Highness's clothes. And after examining himself, the prince laughed with satisfaction, examining the reflection. Turning to the maid, the interlocutor thanked Liana. The girl made a slight bow and explained that it was a great honor for her. Finally, she heard words about how nice it would be if there was such a maid in the palace. The fallen girl walked alone down the corridor, lost in thought. The maid remembered the words and the mocking look of His Highness. Liana ran, believing that her heart was actually beating like that from running, and not because of the prince. But suddenly the girl stumbled, falling onto the corridor floor with a cry. Liana covered her face with her palm, not understanding why she felt so uncomfortable. The maid makes sure that anyone in her place would also get nervous. The girl realized that she was just an ordinary maid who had chosen clothes for that person. Suddenly, someone offered a hand to the lady sitting on the floor, causing her to look up in disbelief. Liana placed her hand in someone else's and awkwardly thanked them for the help with a smile. The man who offered his hand asked her if she had cried. The stranger had difficulty asking if Liana was okay and if she was injured. Theodore assumed he was from the kingdom of Etla, to which she only heard one word, burn. The girl managed to understand that the man was talking about the wound and thanked him for his concern. Then, according to his words, Liana understood that the wound needed to be healed. Theodore began to explain to him that these were just small things, especially since she had wasted so much time. And the lady was already waiting for her. As if speaking in fragments, the stranger spoke of his room, which made Liana think that she was being offered to recover in his room. The maid thanked the boy again and explained to him again that it was really time for her to leave, because they were waiting for her. But the stranger stopped Theodore and grabbed her clothes with his fingers, with a calm expression on his face. The boy began to talk about his room again. The maid immediately frowned and said she was not going anywhere with him. She moved away and explained that in the Empire, it was not customary to enter the room of a man you meet for the first time. The stranger was still speaking in fragments that he did not know where her room was. The girl realized that this was no longer her business, and it was time to run to Lady Natasha. Liana left dissatisfied about what sense chastity made if the concept of chastity did not exist. She left the man alone in the corridor, not understanding that he was just trying to explain to her that he didn't know where her room was. Already in the library, Liana tried to find the right book among the wide shelves. Finally, she found the book Phoebe was reading, and it wouldn't hurt to check what her niece was reading. God was so lonely that he created a creature to be by his side. It turned out to be Manish himself, whom the Almighty blessed with his strength. And then he created many different people for his being. However, Manish, relying on God's power and favor, became increasingly arrogant. The name of one of the blessings granted by God is extinction, because his words could erase anything from the face of the earth. Manish always enjoyed using this power, and only for his selfish pleasure ruined many lives. Over time, God looked again at the creature he loved so much and realized that it was his fault that he had made him so lonely. Only after receiving Ariadne's love will he understand what a blessing the Almighty has granted him. And soon the blessing given to Manish became a curse for him. Sharp five senses pierced his entire body, and the sounds of conversations. The sounds of his own breathing, and any whisper caused him terrible pain. It was Ariadne who saved him, because only when he touched her could he breathe deeply. Everyone who saw this understood the name of the last blessing God granted Manish. Liana read the last line of the book that was written about eternal love. Closing the book, the maid understood that the story was legendary, but she thought it was too early for children to read such things. Suddenly, somewhere behind her, the girl heard loud shouts of dissatisfaction. Liana turned towards the sounds and realized that she heard a rather familiar voice. Theodore saw Lady Angelica and young Master Percival among the books. The maid immediately hid, realizing that if she was caught, they would decide she had been eavesdropping. And then she would definitely be in trouble. The brother asked Angelica to leave the maid alone, because she wouldn't set foot in this house anyway soon. Liana clutched the book in her hands, fearfully listened to their conversation, and began to understand something. After a while, there was a cake with candles on the table, and happy birthday greetings were heard. Phoebe sat in the center of the table, and everyone congratulated her on the holiday. Everyone started applauding, happy for the girl in the center of the table. Liana sat dejected, without saying a word, and started eating. Suddenly, Deborah, sitting next to her, started whispering to her about the expression on her face, fearing that this would upset the birthday girl. Theodore apologized and explained that she was just thinking about something for a while. Now the woman opposite began to ask if Liana was tired at work. The interlocutor offered to stay with them because many rooms remain empty. Liana promised to move in with them as soon as Phoebe grew up a little. The girl realized that they needed at least a little more money to live in this hotel. Because if they knew all the circumstances, they would provide them with the most convenient conditions. With a bright smile on her face, the woman asked her to definitely come to them. Theodore agreed and realized that she did not want to use such kind people for her own benefit. Suddenly, the boy at the table started talking about how he bought a gift. He turned to Phoebe and asked if she liked playing with dolls. After a couple of moments, the girl had a rabbit in her hands, rejoicing in such a toy. Liana thanked Matthew, wondering if she could thank him, to which she immediately received a negative answer. Behind them, Deborah looked and realized that the boy was already in love with Theodore. The girl smiled and decided to tease her brother a little. Deborah opened another box and wondered out loud what was inside. The boy, completely embarrassed, tried to pronounce Liana's name because the gift was intended for her. Suddenly, his sister said that this box was probably for Phoebe. The underwear was for a girl whom everyone admired. Then, the cheerful Phoebe approached her uncle and thanked him for such a gift. With a bright, angelic smile, she admitted that she really liked Matthew. The fallen boy replied by saying how beautiful she was and how much her uncle liked her. At the end of the day, the girls walked around talking about how fun the day had been. Deborah asked her friend to come more often because she was simply getting stressed. Suddenly, Phoebe woke up, drowsily recognizing her aunt, who asked her to sleep a little longer. But the girl wanted to tell Liana something in her ear so that no one else would hear them. Phoebe admitted that everything said in the house was not serious, because the one she liked most in the world was her aunt. Liana, with a smile on her face, replied saying that she liked her niece the most too. And then she laughed because Phoebe was already speaking Edel in her sleep. Theodore understood that the book the girl was reading belonged to Angelica, who did not want to study. The girl did not understand at all what the Baldwins were planning. She remembered the dialogue about how the girl would leave her house very soon. Angelica thought that Benjamin Owen wanted to marry a commoner. But her brother immediately explained to her that she would not marry him, but his father. Liana realized that her mistress Natasha didn't even know about it. This means you must find some way to save your lover. While cleaning, Liana heard Annie's words that no matter how much she thought. But this time, everything was real. After all, there has never been a case where the prince personally visited the mansion. It is already obvious to everyone that His Highness is in love with her lady Natasha. Liana thought that if he really liked her, then he should have come in his formal attire. But as a result, His Highness came to dinner in completely different clothes. Liana warned her friend that she would have to go to the gardener because it was time to change the central arrangement. The girl walked down the corridor, thinking that after finishing with the hall, she would help the other maids clean. Through her thoughts, Liana heard some sounds and directed her attention to them. She realized that Angelica was clearly in a bad mood, and it would be better not to run into her. Liana tried to carefully walk past the lady without looking up. Suddenly, Theodore felt someone trip her, causing her to start falling. And then, she completely felt the water that Angelica had sprayed her with fall onto her. With a satisfied smile, she didn't know if the maid would have time to clean before His Highness arrived. Angelica stomped on Liana's hand with her heel, calling her an exceptional maid. It would be the other innocent maids who would receive overtime. Not her. Lady Angelica scoffed at the servants, wondering if she had lost her authority. And then she said that maybe Liana finally understood what was what. An apology was heard from the maid, which caused Lady Angelica to remove her foot. The aristocrat got bored because it was just a simple trick and decided to continue on her way. The girl got up, sighing and realizing that she had no time. Today is going well for her because she can still use her hand. Lady Angelica did not beat Liana or openly mock her for a long time and simply moved on. The girl decided that everything was in order and therefore she should hurry. A little later, they told the prince about a rare object made of authentic porcelain. Count Jack Baldwin said that only 200 of these copies survived. His Highness moved on, considering it excellent work. The prince said he knew how many ceramics of this type were on the Baldwin estate, and how they ended up here. His Highness asked if there were other works of art he should know about. Count Baldwin immediately awkwardly announced that there was nothing else. The man apologized to His Highness and decided to leave the room quickly. Suddenly, Lady Natasha also arrived, not expecting the prince to come to the estate. The boy asked her if he had disappointed the lady at least once, because he always keeps his word. Lady Natasha agreed with His Highness's words and realized that she should not lie. Therefore, the girl keeps her word in return, hugging her interlocutor. The prince carefully reached for the lady's back to grab the piece of paper. Lady Natasha smiled and offered to look at some evidence. Already sitting in front of his interlocutor, the prince realized that something was strange. He understood that Marquis Owen was continuing the path of smugglers, which was his betrayal. Not Baldwin's. Lady Natasha calmly explained that an agreement had recently been reached between the families. The Baldwin family signed an exclusive contract with a trading company run by Marquis Owen. His Highness thought for a moment, realizing that there were better options for the deal. But this no longer matters, since both families will be destroyed. Lady Natasha had already taken into account that the plan could change and checked it again. The girl realized that now, when everything was over, her old wish would come true. The prince noticed that all the laundresses were busy, although it was too early to change the bed linen. His Highness stood up and realized that it would be nice to live up to the expectations of the maids. With a malicious smile, the prince approached Lady Natasha, who leaned back slightly. He realized what a pity it was that they were so busy cleaning the sheets. At the same time, Liana was walking down the corridor, thinking about what she should do now. She was worried, not knowing whether to dry Lady Natasha first or run some water in the bathtub. Suddenly, she heard the bell. She realized it was time to leave and decided to go to the bathroom. But suddenly, Liana saw a seated prince who greeted her. The maid could not understand what His Highness was still doing here. After all, she had heard that the prince usually leaves before the exclusive maid arrives. Rolling up his sleeves, he announced that since she had to go to the bathroom, he just needed to wash his hands. Suddenly, the prince asked if the girl had found the necessary rooms in the imperial palace. Liana told how a court lady kindly gave her a hint. His Highness dried his hands with a towel and said how glad he was to hear this. Suddenly, he grabbed Liana's bow, realizing that the exclusive maid should not clean. The girl immediately apologized to the departing prince, shrinking her body. Before leaving, His Highness asked to take care of Lady Natasha. The maid sighed and confidently promised to fulfill the prince's request. And after he left, she buried herself in a towel, realizing how embarrassed she was by this situation. Already in Lady Natasha's room, the maid asked her if she liked the earrings. The aristocrat responded positively, explaining that she was just thinking for a while. She did not understand why the prince spilled milk tea on the sheet. His Highness explained that it would be strange if the clothes were dirty, but the bedding was not. He knew that they definitely wouldn't try it, so no suspicions would arise. Lady Natasha realized with displeasure the awkward situation that had arisen. Although it is insulting, this attitude is better than the previous one, since they did not rush to provide real evidence. Suddenly, the maid began to say that she had something to tell her mistress. Lady Natasha turned around, seeing Eliana's uncertainty, who might say something. The maid began to recount how, going to the library, she overheard a conversation between the young gentleman and the lady. The girl knew it was rude, but she couldn't leave because it was about Lady Natasha. The aristocrat's eyes widened, asking what they were saying about her. Liana said that Marquis Arnold Owen wants to marry Lady Natasha. The aristocrat explained that she had already found out about this, because Madame wants to take everything into her hands. The girl realized that it was not just about a trade agreement. In fact, this was just the result of Lady Natasha's sale. The aristocrat praised her maid for her good job, although she was only doing her duty. Suddenly, Natasha asked Liana what she would do in her place. The maid said that if she were in the lady's place, she would have allied with the Marquis's second son, Owen. Lady Natasha was surprised by such a strange solution to this situation. The aristocrat asked where the maid heard the name of his second son. In response to the explanations, heard that it was heard in the dialogue between Madame and the young master. But Lady Natasha corrected her by asking how Liana knew that the young master had sent a letter. The maid looked at her confusedly, and the interlocutor realized that Theodore actually knew nothing. It became clear that Liana actually just said something about concluding an alliance without knowing anything about the letter. The maid specifically talked about Benjamin because Madame mentioned his name in a dialogue with her brother. Liana thought that, based on the assumption that he was in love with Lady Natasha, it would be a good idea to declare an official relationship with him. And then the Marquis will not be able to marry the girl declared as his son's lover. Liana said that this is only her opinion and that everything completely depends on Lady Natasha's choice. The aristocrat turned and thoughtfully pronounced the name Benjamin Owen. Lady Natasha realized that she had an agreement with the prince, but she could suddenly change her mind. The aristocrat looked at her maid again and realized that, just as she had thought, she could not be released. Lady Natasha headed for the door and called Liana because it was time for them to leave. And then, quickly turning around, she ordered her to look forward to her salary this month. The girl smiled, happily realizing that she could find the room earlier. Already near the estate, Lady Natasha was talking with the prince while the servants waited aside. Liana was glad that she told the incident in the library not for money, but for Lady Natasha. Deborah next to her was happy that the two were going together, and she could chat a lot. Liana agreed, because His Highness and Lady Natasha could have a good time. Suddenly, the aristocrat in the carriage called her maid, to which she immediately turned around. Lady Natasha carefully invited the maid to sit next to her in the imperial carriage. The girl, with a soft smile on her face, announced that they would go together. Liana realized that to get closer to Benjamin Owen, it was necessary to confirm that the relationship with His Highness was not serious. And the simplest way to do this is to prove that they were not alone. Of course, the imperial carriage is too luxurious for an ordinary maid. Prince Ilid announced that they had finally met again. The maid turned to His Highness and politely greeted him with a nod. Prince Ilith knocked on the glass with his knuckles, indicating that he was leaving. And finally, the imperial carriage moved and departed. The boy calmly admitted that it was the first time he had seen a maid without a maid's uniform. Liana couldn't understand why the prince was talking to her and not Lady Natasha. Natasha. Theodore saw that the lady was not the type of person who would get angry about talking to her lover. But something like that existed. Suddenly, His Highness invited Liana to work at the imperial palace. Lady Natasha nudged the maid and told her what an opportunity this was. Liana thanked the prince, but refused his offer to work at the palace. The aristocrat hugged the girl, reminding her that this was a good opportunity for her. His Highness compared that it was much better than being a maid for the Baldwins. The prince laughed, realizing that if someone heard him, they would think he was threatening Theodore. Even if they deny it, to them it is nothing more than entertainment provided by the maid. Liana realized that at such moments, it is best to behave as silently as possible. The maid looked out the window and witnessed the conversations between Lady Natasha and His Highness. The aristocrat realized that Elide didn't even remember the name of the fourth prince of the Ethel. Lady Natasha thought that His Highness should remember the names of the people with whom the meeting was to take place. In any case, her brother will do all the work, because the prince's role in this performance is small. Liana sat in silence, looking out the window, overhearing their conversation. The prince admitted that he doesn't even remember the names of his maids, who have worked for him for 10 years. Lady Natasha confirmed that it was indeed difficult to remember all the maids. The aristocrat invited the prince to bet on the name of her maid. Madame suggested listening to Liana's name and checking if His Highness would forget it in a month. Prince Ilit smiled, wondering what their bet would be. Lady Natasha also promises to forget, but the name Anna, as he calls everyone, it is not accepted. His Highness agreed and asked what the maid's name was. Looking at the floor, the girl calmly introduced herself as Liana Theodore. The prince admitted that it was luck, because it was very difficult to meet this maid. And the name was easy to remember. Already late at night, in her room, Liana cried out, clutching her ankle. She put on new shoes especially to match her outfit and polished them again. But she is glad that at least it is only a small wound and not an injury. The maid looked at herself in the reflection, remembering the prince's words about her name. It is normal for the master to forget the maid's name. This is not necessary, which is why they do not think about such things. On the other hand, a maid has no right to forget her master's name, which makes this double standard quite absurd. After bandaging her leg, Liana realized that it would be noticeable, but she had no other option. Everything is fine, because it is unlikely that someone would want to look under the maid's skirt. Liana looked around trying to understand where the banquet hall was headed. Suddenly she noticed a man who, like a parrot, repeated words around the room. The girl tried to pass quickly and carefully, but the man greeted her. Liana understood that she would be chased if she didn't greet him. Suddenly, the stranger quickly began to approach the maid, who was immediately frightened. She tried to somehow stop the man who was too close to her. The girl slipped on the wet grass while moving away from the stranger. Unable to maintain balance, Liana began to fall backward quickly. At the last moment, the stranger grabbed Theodore, preventing her from crashing onto the floor. He asked her to be careful, the girl who awkwardly thanked him. Liana understood that if she fell there, she would not avoid a concussion. The girl asked him how she could repay him, since he had helped her again. The man only pointed to Liana's hand, where there was a mark. The maid tried to understand what the stranger was trying to say, who spoke in fragments. The man said something about an escort, and Liana explained to him that she was only a maid. The stranger fell silent, looking only at the interlocutor in front of him. Liana looked back exactly the same way, not understanding what he meant. More slowly, the unknown explained that he was an escort. The maid was silent for a while, thinking and putting everything in its place in her head. Finally, she realized that this was the one who accompanied the delegation from Edila. She introduced herself as a maid of the Baldwin family and politely welcomed him to the empire. He simply put his hand on his chest, calling himself Archangel Abontela. Liana remembered that only royalty or imperial family can use the name of a country as a surname. She remembered it from Phoebe's words, who read them attentively in the book. Having understood how to translate his words, Liana realized that he was Archangel of Etila. Seeing the incomprehensible face of her interlocutor, Theodore thought that he was speaking too quickly. Much more slowly, the girl began to pronounce his name so that they would understand her. Archangel repeated his words clumsily, mixing some letters. The maid pronounced his name even more slowly, syllable by syllable, so that this time the boy understood everything. A slight blush appeared on the interlocutor's face, causing him to turn his head slightly. Finally, hearing the correct pronunciation of his name, Liana applauded, rejoiced. Suddenly, the maid noticed something behind the boy, crying out slightly. The girl realized that it was time to quickly join everyone in the banquet hall. Liana politely bid farewell to her interlocutor and explained that she had to leave. Suddenly, Archangel grabbed the maid by the sleeve and asked her to wait. He pointed to the guy under the tree and again started talking about the escort. The stranger looks more elegant as he represents the kingdom. The girl admired him and realized that her prince was probably there too. After shouting, the boy tried to explain something to his interlocutor. Liana explained that she already understood that Lord Archangel was an escort. The man again tried to tell her something, trying to explain. Liana reminded him that she had to hurry to the banquet hall, so she was leaving. Still trying to say something, Archangel followed his interlocutor. Liana flashed her gaze, demanding they follow her. Otherwise, she would scream. The man looked clumsily and dissatisfied at the maid, who still didn't understand anything. Behind Archangel, the guy sat on one knee and wondered if he had called him. His Highness called out the name Liana Theodore, taking care of her somewhere. The guy turned out to be Archangel von Etila, the fourth prince of Etila, who observed the departing lady with interest. Already in the banquet hall, the maids were talking among themselves, and suddenly Deborah pointed to the center. Next to Prince Ilid and Lady Natasha, there was a guy unknown to them. A friend explained to Liana that he is the crown prince. His Highness is an example of a worthy heir to the throne. But his brother, Prince Ilid, is the very embodiment of a mischievous angel. Deborah admitted that she felt that the younger heir was overshadowing his brother. Liana thought that Prince Ilid definitely had something that made him hard to overlook. And it's not even surprising that he doesn't remember the names of his maids. Suddenly, Lady Natasha shook her head and signaled the maid to come closer. The aristocrat asked her maid to bring a shawl from the imperial carriage. And then she pointed to a man in a gray suit on the second-floor terrace, who turned out to be Benjamin Owen. Lady Natasha carefully handed a piece of paper to the maid and asked her to secretly pass it to him. The maid took the small package, knowing she had to do this. And all this is mainly for the future of her Lady Natasha. Liana looked towards the corner where the stairs should be. The girl realized that if the maid started climbing the corridor stairs, they would definitely notice her. Suddenly, a knife flew right in front of Liana's face, smashing her against the building wall. The girl froze in fear, unable to do anything. They pressed her face down against the floor and began to interrogate her about what she was doing here. The stranger did not believe that Liana could be there at this particular moment. Suddenly, he noticed a small piece of paper in her hands and took it away. Unfolding the sheet, he shouted to his comrades that the girl was unarmed and clearly not trained in fencing. He realized that Liana was supposed to deliver a note from Natasha Baldwin to Benjamin. Suddenly, Arnold Owen emerged from the shadows, demanding a note addressed to his son. Taking the sheet of paper, the man began to carefully read the text contained in it. And then he shouted, not understanding how Count Baldwin was taking care of his daughter, because only 2 weeks had passed since they promised to hand Natasha over to Arnold. The man was asked to be quiet, which made him shout again, realizing how much he could lose. Liana realized that His Highness Prince Lennox was with them. The Crown Prince directed his attention to Vanessa, who promised that no one would be there. The maid trembled as those present discussed what they would do with her. Suddenly, Theodore heard someone taking care of her, without leaving any trace. The girl realized that they would kill her just like that, not believing what was happening. Tears streamed down Liana's face, and words of mercy were heard in her head. Suddenly, something interfered with the sword that was supposed to be used to kill Liana. The maid opened her eyes and saw Prince Ilid in front of her, who came to her aid. His Highness began to attack first, driving everyone away from Liana. His older brother frowned at that arrogant voice and grimaced. Prince Ilid demanded that Vanessa not move, otherwise the poison would spread faster. And then he made a sharp move, sticking the sword into the girl's body. His Highness realized that he should have worn a black suit because it was all dirty. Prince Ilid approached his brother, wondering if he was satisfied yet. Prince Lennox wondered if the younger one was following him. Prince Ilid explained that his beloved maid disappeared into the darkness and did not return for a long time, which made him curious. Addressing Liana, the boy admitted that he thought the maid had joined some kind of private party. Ilid's older brother realized that the younger brother might be interested in his lover's maid. Wiping the blood from his hands, His Highness only agreed with this because he is a sensitive companion. And affectionate, he is also such a generous brother that he turns a blind eye to the crimes of his elders. Lennox explained that he only spoke to the Marquis about their business relations and only wanted to intimidate the maid. After which, Prince Ilid wondered why they were discussing this in the backyard. The elder continued to explain that there are those who want to dig under Marquis Owen's command. And he found a place where there should be no people. Prince Lennox walked past his brother and warned him that there were many enemies in the darkness. He turned around and replied to the elder that not everyone in this world is interested in the throne. They asked Lennox not to be so impatient because he hadn't even thought about it. Already in the banquet hall, Arnold realized that any mistake could ruin everything. Prince Lennox just said that his brother understood nothing at all. Arnold Owen asked again, not understanding what the interlocutor meant. And he shouted, looking at him. His Highness tensed, clenching his jaw, causing the veins in his neck to swell. The prince admitted that he was actually not interested in the throne at all, but in Ilith himself. The Marquis looked at his interlocutor with fear and realized that he was ready to tear his brother apart. He got into this smuggling to earn money, but in the end, he may die in a battle between wild animals. Arnold realized that he needed to finish everything quickly and get Lady Natasha back. At the same time, Prince Ilith helped the maid get free, extending his open palm. Liana looked at him and realized how beautiful the hands in front of her were. The girl started to get up by herself, thanking them for the help. Liana admitted that she didn't know how to thank the prince. Suddenly, His Highness took his interlocutor's hand and examined it. Prince Elide informed that she might have a scar on her wrist. The girl explained that this would not interfere with her work in any way, meaning everything is fine. Liana diverted her gaze and said that the trace had nothing to do with work. His Highness began to say that the ball is not just a place to entertain aristocrats. And then he asked not to tell anyone what happened, especially Lady Natasha. The maid exhaled heavily, realizing that much more awaited her ahead. Suddenly, she saw His Highness reading Lady Natasha's note. The maid immediately tried to snatch the piece of paper from the prince's hands. Who did not want to give it back to her? The guy guessed that Liana was supposed to deliver the note to Benjamin Owen. He knew that the girl could not speak the language of Edel, in which everything was written. Liana understood that the prince should not know about this, because he shares a bed with Lady Natasha. Now His Highness clearly understood that Theodore had to sneak in to deliver the message. Prince Elid handed the note to the maid, who immediately thanked him. He remembered how he told Liana that he was a generous lover. Wiping the blood from the maid's face, he invited her to return home early and rest. The girl jumped away from the prince, claiming that everything was fine and that she had to finish her work. His Highness smiled at the fact that the lady almost died, but wants to complete the job. Liana hoped the prince would finally say she could be free. But Elith suddenly asked the figure if there was another exit nearby. Turning a dark corner, the voice admitted that it knew nothing about it. And then Sharon Neville, the prince's chief assistant, asked to warn him next time His Highness decides to do something else. And Lead started joking that deep down his assistant probably liked it. And then His Highness laughed, looking at the disgust of the guy in front of him. Cheryl cleared her throat and spoke about the emergency exit on the left wall. Looking at the floor, the maid awkwardly thanked them again. The girl decided that she should leave quickly and again felt pain in her leg. Liana realized that now she should at least wear comfortable shoes, when suddenly His Highness called the girl's name, which made her eyes widen. Theodore turned around, and Prince Elid asked her to take care of her wounds and heard a positive response. Already in the room, Liana asked Phoebe what to do in the situation if she didn't return. Having heard the correct answers, she praised her niece and patted her on the head. Phoebe immediately noticed her aunt's paleness and wanted to know what had happened. Liana made the excuse that she took too long washing her face and nothing happened. She stroked her sleepy niece who, having calmed her interest, began to fall asleep. Liana realized that she was still happy to have returned alive after all. If the girl died, she could no longer admire Phoebe's beautiful face. Liana looked at her bandaged hand, considering it ugly. But she is the support of the family and has to raise her little niece. And this scar is proof of her difficult life. But she still remembers His Highness's hands, which were so beautiful. For the first time, Liana felt that her hands were truly in bad shape. After all, she can understand why people came to believe in God. Her blood ran cold with fear, but at the same time she felt relief. It was at the moment of ideal salvation that the girl felt a strong feeling of faith. If His Highness hadn't come, a little more, Ilina would really have died. Still, Prince Ilid saved the girl, even if it was just a coincidence. Even if it was to prevent an injustice, he allowed her to live. Liana thanked him for allowing her to continue this humble life. The next day, the girl looked at Annie surprised, unaware of the second prince's arrival. The maid said she asked Deborah to give her everything, but apparently forgot. Liana remembered that Lady Natasha is always short of staff, so they spin like squirrels in a wheel. Annie suggested that her friend put on a clean uniform and do something with her hair. Liana said she was very busy during the week and couldn't wash her clothes. The girl promised to buy Annie books if she lent her uniform. Standing on the street, Liana looked at the bright sun and realized that summer had arrived. And at the same time, I realized that it was worth taking a break somehow. Liana knew that if she washed her clothes, she would lose her job and would have no choice but to Olga to sanitize. The girl looked at the property and realized that His Highness was probably in the waiting room now. In any case, Liana is the only one who finally remembers that night. The prince behaved as usual, and she did not want any special connection between them. Suddenly, Liana felt disgusted by the smell of cigarettes in the non-smoking area. The girl went out to the smell, wanting to teach the smoker a lesson, and immediately saw the prince, who greeted her. Liana corrected herself, bowing and politely greeting His Highness. Prince Ilid asked if Theodore had taken care of her wounds, and heard a positive answer. The maid once again thanked the boy for saving her and promised not to tell anyone. Liana couldn't understand how long His Highness had been here and for what purpose. Suddenly, the girl smelled flowers, which were brighter than usual. And for some reason, there was a feeling of tickling unknown to her in her heart. Seeing that the maid was turning around, the prince asked where she was going. She explained that she wanted to see Lady Natasha, but it turned out she was still asleep. Liana realized that she had to act calmly when she was with him. The girl promised to send a servant to the prince because he had to take care of Lady Natasha. But His Highness demanded simply to approach him, which made Liana's hands clench. The maid explained that she could hear Prince Ilid perfectly from a distance. His Highness again demanded that the girl simply come to him, and now Liana was already standing next to the boy. Awaiting his new words, Prince Ilid ordered the girl to turn around, which she obediently did. His Highness suddenly touched Liana's waist, making her cry out immediately. The interlocutor immediately calmly explained that her apron string had come undone. The girl couldn't understand why His Highness was doing this. Liana felt embarrassed by such a gesture, which is why her face was covered with a bright blush. The prince, satisfied with himself, said that now she could go wherever she wanted. And then he abruptly announced that pink suits Liana very well. The girl looked at His Highness confusedly because she wasn't wearing anything pink. While changing clothes in her room, Theodore thought about the prince's words. The girl remembered that Annie's clothes didn't fit her well, and she had to secure it with a pin. And then Liana realized the situation and what His Highness was talking about. It turned out that Prince Ilith saw the girl's pink underwear. Liana immediately fell to the floor, and Phoebe, sitting next to her, began to check if everything was all right. The girl made the excuse of a headache, burning with shame upon realization. Lady Natasha, hiding under her cloak, ordered a glass of red rum at the bar. The bartender immediately placed a drink on the table, under which was a small note. The aristocrat immediately took it in her hands and carefully read the text. What was written did not satisfy the girl, which made her grimace. The silhouette approaching from behind began to state that it was definitely Marquis Owen. And then the disguised prince asked how things were going for the aristocrat. She was sure that the Owen family had signed a contract with Baldwin. Lady Natasha explained that they would announce their engagement to the Marquis and get started in 15 days. She wondered if the other person trusted the evidence she had shown him before. The family that Lady Natasha wants to destroy is Baldwin, not Owen. Prince Ilid explained that drug smuggling is a serious sin. Based on this information, the girl will be able to escape punishment, but others will not. And the Baldwin family faces not only the possibility of losing their property, but also the death penalty. Lady Natasha says she must destroy this family. The aristocrat realized that thanks to the prince everything was going more or less well. But she still didn't understand why this man was helping her in her plan. At first glance, it seems that he lives for his own pleasure, but in reality he is not interested in others at all. If Lady Natasha's offer had seemed tempting to him, he could have found the source of the drug himself. The prince wondered if the lady was alone, but she came with her maid. His Highness suggested having dinner together, but was immediately rejected. The aristocrat said she had a meeting with the banker because she was going to steal his property in advance. Liana was walking through the market at that moment, looking at various items on the shelves. The girl was thinking about buying a bow for Phoebe and asked for the price. Liana realized that this was like a 2-day stay in a hotel. Then, the woman tried to negotiate with Theodore, lowering the price considerably. Suddenly, she noticed a familiar silhouette standing nearby and called him. The boy turned towards the voice, immediately recognizing it as Liana Theodore. They greeted each other with a nod, without expecting such a meeting. The boy standing next to Archangel seemed familiar to the girl, and she began to remember. Liana realized that it was the same ambassador gentleman who was standing under the tree at that moment. The girl bowed, deeply apologizing for not recognizing him immediately. At that moment, the men were talking to each other in their own language. The ambassador cleared his throat and explained that it was strange to run into someone who knew he was from another country. The girl admitted that she did not expect him to be able to speak the imperial language so fluently. The boy immediately recognized her skills because he spent a lot of time with the fourth prince of Ethel. Before he could finish speaking, he saw Archelo's murderous glare upon him. Liana said that she did not know at all his etiquette for greeting the prince. The boy also explained that she arrived just in time because he was tired. But he wanted to show his escort the area. Liana realized that she had enough time before Lady Natasha returned. The guy left, leaving Archangelo to supposedly rest the lady. Liana asked her interlocutor where he would like to go. He explained that he only wanted to follow the girl, and that, therefore, she herself had to choose the place. Liana remembered that the boy had already been to the palace and several other good places. The girl offered to tell him about the trends in the Cadogan Empire, and they would start with food. Liana handed her companion a wafer with a bunch of sweets and asked him to try at least one piece. Archangelo realized that this was actually a very tasty dessert that was popular with tourists. Liana handed him a napkin and told him that there was ice cream near his lips. The guy started wiping his face, always in the wrong place. Theodore decided to remove the ice cream from his face with his finger, gently wiping it. The boy's face immediately turned red from such unexpected actions. She asked Archangelo to eat more slowly, because they were not in a hurry. The boy continued to eat, recalling the moment when Liana wiped the ice cream off his face. He got covered in sweetness again, this time on purpose. The girl grabbed her companion by the wrist and decided to take him to the fountain to wash him. Theodore thought that he liked the ice cream very much and wanted to eat it quickly. Already standing by the fountain, Liana offered him to try strawberries and explained what they were. Suddenly, His Highness appeared behind them, greeting the lady. A little earlier, the prince deliberately looked for Liana, wondering where she could be. His Highness overheard the ladies talking about a stranger who looked quite unusual. And then he noticed how Liana was wiping Archangelo's face at the fountain. His Highness noticed how cheerful the girl seemed at that moment. Theodore looked at the prince confusedly, not understanding what this strange situation was. The three of them continued their walk. The girl also told Archangelo where and what was located. Just an hour ago, the men were speaking a language Liana did not understand, and one of them was explaining to Ilid that he had been mistaken for a servant. His Highness agreed to keep the misunderstanding a secret in exchange for going with them. Liana did not understand why they asked for her opinion if they did not take it into account. Theodore wondered how someone could be so shameless. Suddenly, they looked into each other's eyes. Liana looked at him with displeasure while the prince was calm. Turning away, she continued telling Archangelo about the unique books in this alley, and then asked the boy if there was any book he wanted to buy. At that moment, the prince behind them was carefully looking at Liana, examining her. His Highness noticed that the scar he was talking about still remained on her hand. Prince Ilid offered to carry Liana's book, which looked heavy. Theodore squeezed it tighter and explained that his friend had asked him to buy this book. His Highness did not stay behind and asked what the book was called. Suddenly, Archangelo started saying something in his native language. Ilid explained that the boy wanted to buy the Cadogan book as a souvenir. After these words, the girl immediately led them to a good bookstore. Liana pointed at Archangelo and explained what book he was looking for. Suddenly, the prince stood between them, asking if they had books for the maids, because Theodore clearly regrets not being able to buy them earlier. The girl immediately said that Liana was such a sweet boy since he wanted to tell her a story. She pointed to the shelves and explained that this is where all the high-level romance novels were collected. The girl said that a new series of books had appeared that Liana had bought before. Theodore shouted and explained that he bought it for his friend. Looking at His Highness, Liana realized that he was simply mocking her. The girl felt Prince Ilid teasing her with his eternal mockery. She could no longer restrain herself and began to shout that His Highness was behaving inappropriately. Prince Ilid held out his hands, pretending that nothing was happening and that he knew nothing about it. He told Liana that she herself brought them here, having a love story with her. The prince did nothing more than naively follow the girl. And then Liana shouted that she even saw his underwear. She reminded the prince of his words that Theodore was wearing pink. After thinking for a while, the boy remembered the situation the lady had in mind. In a couple of seconds, His Highness burst out laughing at the girl. Liana looked at him silently, not understanding why he seemed so pleased. The girl asked him at least to apologize for the situation, which had left her embarrassed for a long time. But His Highness still did not understand what he did wrong and when. Arcangelo at that moment only looked at them sideways, without intervening in the conversation. And then the boy said something again in his own language, which Liana did not understand. In the evening, Theodore said goodbye to the men and apologized for leaving them like that. But at the same time, she was glad that this day had finally ended. But suddenly, someone behind her called her, and Liana stopped, waiting. Mr. Arcangelo was quickly approaching her, trying to catch his breath. Liana began to worry about what might have happened if he ran towards her. Suddenly, the boy apologized, and the girl looked at him confusedly. Arcangelo put his hand to his chest, admitting that he was a prince and apologizing again. Liana realized that he had run to her only to admit a lie. The girl suddenly laughed, and her interlocutor looked on in disbelief. Liana thanked Arcangelo for honestly admitting that he was, in fact, a prince. In fact, the girl realized this 2 hours ago, at the moment they were left alone. No servant would stand staring at the prince without even saying goodbye. And it would be strange if the prince spoke good Imperial, but his servant didn't. Liana replied, apologizing for knowing everything and not admitting it right away. Arcangelo didn't understand why she was thanking him if he was lying. Liana immediately explained, with a bright smile, that honesty and incorruptibility are the most important virtues for employees. Clearing his throat, the boy shamefully admitted that his name was Arkan. Liana realized that the interlocutor wanted her to call him by his name, and not Mr. Arcangelo. The girl couldn't believe how different the culture of their kingdoms was, that a simple maid could call a prince by his nickname. Liana smiled sweetly and promised to call him Prince Arkan the next time they met. After which she made a slight bow, bidding farewell to her interlocutor until their next meeting. Walking completely alone, the girl thought that, upon hearing his name for the first time, Mr. Arkan remembered it immediately. And then he remembered Prince Ilid, who made a bet and doesn't remember anything at all. At first, the girl decided that he was in that mood for that day. But over time, she realized that he had completely forgotten the maid's name. After all, he is a man who doesn't remember the name of the maid, who served him for 10 years. Liana noticed a tree with pink petals that seemed beautiful and pleasantly colored to her. The maid exhaled in disgust, not understanding what beauty was for if she didn't even know what she had done wrong. But suddenly the girl began to think, with her eyes wide open and realizing something. Liana remembered that Deborah had helped her clean that day, making sure everything was tied up. This means that the pin couldn't come undone so easily for the prince to see her underwear. When Liana looked in the mirror, everything was in perfect order. She only had a careless knot that His Highness had tied himself. The girl remembered the situation they were in and the words about whether the maid was really beautiful. Liana blushed intensely, realizing how embarrassed she was by the current situation. That day, her underwear was pink, and she only misinterpreted His Highness's words. For Prince Ilith, this might have been a trifle, but certainly not for the maid. Liana even kept the ribbon that His Highness tied for her that day. The underwear he saw was thrown in the trash because she was ashamed to show the prince her old underwear. And worn out. From that day on, throughout the week, Liana thought about him, only waiting until his image finally disappeared. The girl realized that the reason she was so embarrassed was the feeling of love. Liana fell to her knees and realized that she shouldn't have even started all this. After all, this is a feeling that will never be reciprocated, about which the girl no longer knew what to do now. Already at the ball, Prince Elide realized that he was here again and listening to endless conversations. His Highness had the honor of hearing from people how much she resembled the Empress. The old woman fanned herself, talking about her appearance and skills, which reminded him of Manish's diaries that went down in history. The interlocutor hinted that His Highness could be the one. Unexpectedly, the Crown Prince, Ilid's brother, appeared next to them. The woman bowed her head to him, apologizing for her own words. She confirmed that her brother is an exceptional person, which many agree with. The woman felt embarrassed, so with her head bowed, she couldn't find a word. Thought Prince Ilid, noticing that his brother was like impenetrable ice. His Highness ruined the atmosphere of this evening and is in no hurry to leave. Elide bid farewell to his interlocutors one last time and explained that he wanted to get some fresh air. The boy went out onto the balcony thinking about why his brother was so eager to take the throne. Prince Elide understood that the status of Archduke of the imperial family would be enough for him. Cadogan is a country that has grown in power thanks to Manish's power, as upon awakening he put on the emperor's crown and achieved unprecedented victories. So whoever the crown prince is, if Manish comes, he will have to leave this place. The prince is sure that it cannot be him, but despite this, his brother has always treated him with suspicion. His brother's thirst for power gave rise to an inferiority complex in him towards Ilid. Suddenly, His Highness noticed that a girl sitting below the balcony was looking at him. From her modest attire, Prince Ilid realized that she was not an aristocrat, but a commoner. At the same time, he noticed that she was not wearing a maid's uniform, which means one of the noble ladies brought her along. But it was clear how the girl was looking with interest at the small lake. It contained ordinary carp, which she apparently liked very much. Examining the lady more closely, His Highness realized that her outlines were very familiar to him. Suddenly, the girl turned around and saw the prince standing on the balcony. Liana smiled sweetly at the boy standing there, covering herself with a slight blush. His Highness remained silent, not stopping looking at her and recognizing her. And then the prince completely exhaled, realizing that it was only a maid. Because he almost succumbed to temptation. Suddenly, behind him, he heard one of the maids loudly call Liana. Deborah asked her friend to wait while she came down, ignoring the prince on the balcony below. This behavior immediately surprised His Highness, not expecting that they wouldn't even notice him. Prince Ilid laughed at this situation because it was the first time this had happened to him. After all, he receives public attention, is secretly envied, and has never doubted his existence. Already in his room, the prince remembered what happened and realized that they simply hadn't noticed him. He remembered Liana pretending not to care, although she always ended up feeling embarrassed when she looked at him. In front of Arcangelo, he tried not to call the lady by name, but given her reaction. There was nothing to worry about. His Highness expected his gift to arrive safely. He believed that Liana deserved it, because she became a maid who brought color to his gray life. The prince knew that she wouldn't be left out either, because she had been His Highness's favorite for about a month. In her room, Liana stood in front of a table on which there were 2 boxes. The girl couldn't understand what was in front of her and why she got it. She noticed the imperial family sign on the box and thought it was a gift for Lady Natasha. Opening the first box, she saw inside an expensive and elaborate hairpin. And then, a small note fell out saying that the gift was intended for Theodore. Liana tried to convince herself that His Highness was kind to her because she was Lady Natasha's maid. And inside the second box was an equally beautiful butterfly-shaped hair clip. Having examined everything, there was no note inside anymore, and it was unknown why he gave the lady 2 luxurious jewels. Liana thought the prince gave it to her in memory of those words in the library. The girl firmly decided to return all the jewelry because it was too much for a maid. If Liana had more than she could afford, it would surely only bring trouble. Theodore wondered what Prince Ilid was really trying to achieve with this. The girl supposed that His Highness wanted to spend the night with her, which was very much like him. She finally decided to keep the gifts and return them when the right time came. She must not have anything that does not belong to her, neither things, nor time, nor money. Moreover, the girl must not have any feelings that could interfere. And on the day of Natasha's engagement to Marquis Owen, the mansion was especially noisy. The maids whispered among themselves about the couple and realized that probably nothing had gone right for the lady with the emperor's son. Deborah couldn't believe the engagement because they weren't 20 or 30, but almost 40 years apart. Liana warned her friend that she was making too much noise, but not even that stopped her. The girl was sure that Lady Natasha really had some plan. Her master couldn't just give up and leave everything behind. In the end, that note for Benjamin got lost, and they started considering the possibility that His Highness would cancel the engagement. After this, Prince Ilith stopped visiting them. He neither visited them in person nor sent them letters. The engagement day has already arrived, and there is no news from him, so you can no longer count on his help. This can only mean that there is only one way left to save Lady Natasha. She will fulfill the lady's will by delivering another note to Benjamin Owen. But for now, this is only an engagement ceremony. The official wedding has not yet taken place. Benjamin Owen could really do something unaristocratic. This means that he will be the one who can save Lady Natasha from this situation. Prince Ilid at that moment carefully stepped out from behind the tree, looked around, and realized how difficult it was to avoid meeting people. He wanted to see Natasha's exit, which could cause rumors, and that's why he had no choice but to come secretly. His Highness raised his head and noticed the beautiful pink petals. Looking down, the prince wondered why he came this way. He really came specifically to look at Lady Natasha. The prince remembered Liana and decided that she would be his in any case. According to the plan, he stopped coming to this place, and everything else is in Lady Natasha's hands. His Highness's thoughts and reflections were interrupted by the words that smoking was prohibited here. A little girl standing around the corner pointed to the place where cigarettes were supposed to be smoked. His Highness asked to make an exception with him, to which he received a firm refusal. Upon learning that he was a prince, the girl began to wonder how much higher his status was than the count's. Realizing that he held a high position, Phoebe bowed and gave him permission to smoke. Suddenly, His Highness took out a small candy for the girl. She turned away, saying that her aunt had forbidden her from accepting anything from strangers. The boy explained that it was okay if the prince himself offered her candy. And finally, after this, the girl nodded, thanking her interlocutor. His Highness began to question the little one, and she said that she lived in this place with her aunt. The prince was surprised that she was alone, but everything because her aunt was sorting out some problems. The girl admitted that she had a fight with Alice, and His Highness began to wonder why this happened. After this, tears appeared in the bay's eyes, and her voice began to tremble. The prince clumsily realized that he had touched an edge he shouldn't have touched. He explained that Alice had said she had a mother, not an aunt. At the same time, the girl admitted that she was not jealous at all, because her aunt was much kinder, better, and more beautiful. His Highness asked if Alice's mother was scary, to which he immediately received a positive answer. The girl continued talking about how they taught her not to be offended by other mothers. Prince Ilid stopped her flow of words and suggested she blow her nose with a handkerchief. His Highness promised that everything was fine and that she could manage without her mother. The prince said that he also grew up with a nanny, but eventually he grew up. And he became a good person. The girl kept chewing the candy, and His Highness thought about how cute she was. Looking at the baby again, the boy noticed that this hair color seemed familiar to him. Prince Ilid called the girl and explained that he wanted to ask her about her aunt. At the same time, shouts were heard inside the mansion, from the aristocrat asking the maid to comfort him. Liana struggled to break free, saying that she was Lady Natasha's exclusive maid. But Benjamin called her an ordinary servant and told her that he needed to vent his anger. Owen spoke about how difficult it was to treat someone he loved with all his heart like a new mother. Liana realized that Benjamin was not the only hope, because he was just like Arnold. Or even worse. The maid began to shout loudly and ask someone to help her. Benjamin, angry, called her crazy and threw her away from him. The aristocrat ordered that no one should enter or leave his room. The disheveled Liana lay on the floor with tears in her eyes, not understanding why she had to endure this. She realized that it was because she was an ordinary maid. For all this, she could have even died if she hadn't been saved at the last moment. Many believe that she cannot have rights and emotions like members of the nobility. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling her aunt. His Highness appeared in the hallway, looking at Benjamin with disgust. Without saying a word, Prince Elith kicked the aristocrat in the stomach, who didn't understand where he came from. Phoebe immediately ran to Liana and asked if she was all right. Another servant rushed into the room and asked His Highness to calm down. But Prince Elite only ordered not to move unless he wanted to be next. His Highness turned to Liana, not understanding why she was crying all the time. Benjamin stood up and shouted who he was to stop Owen. The boy realized that the aristocrat was completely crazy, not recognizing the prince in front of him. And Lyd began to say that a nobleman should at least be ashamed of such an offense. Benjamin began to make excuses, saying that this maid came to him herself. The prince said that he could take her side in court and demand higher compensation. And then he began to wonder if Benjamin wanted to take Theodore as a wife. Prince Lyd revealed that he could find himself isolated from society due to his marriage to a maid. His Highness realized that it would be better if she were an imperial maid. But for now, he could only agitate the situation. In fact, instead of risking her life on a useless mission, she should have remained discreet. He decided soon to take Liana and let her live by his side without worrying about anything. The engagement was finally canceled because Benjamin was arrested and imprisoned for drug use. Since he was the groom's son, the ceremony was suspended and only striking decorations remained. And the maids spent the rest of the day worrying, further fueling gossip about the failed ceremony. Liana sat by her niece's bed until she finally fell asleep. Theodore was able to leave early thanks to the help of her friends, wash up, and calm Phoebe. In fact, the girl thought for the first time that it was magical when the prince's bright blonde hair appeared against the sky. It was thanks to Liana that His Highness found himself in great danger. Prince Elid's like a savior sent by God, and the girl wanted him to help her. For the knight to defeat the villain with a smile, and it seems that at that moment he looked at the boy with nostalgia in his eyes. But in fact, at this moment the whole fairy tale ends for the lady. She remembered how easily an aristocrat could become isolated due to his marriage to a maid. That knight on a white horse expected that his brother would not destroy him. But Liana in this fairy tale is not a princess, but a snake who decided to seduce a nobleman. Madly waiting for him, the girl forgot about the reality in which the maid is invisible. Liana realized that it was really necessary to return the gifts, and the right time had come. It is better to timely face hopes and expectations that do not correspond to reality. Upon opening the wardrobe, the girl couldn't understand why there was so much mess inside. And then Liana noticed that the hairpin had completely disappeared, not understanding what had happened. Theodore was not the only one who lost his jewels. All employees reported the loss of valuables and the amount stolen. Liana sighed deeply and realized that she could not describe everything honestly. Since it was a gift from the prince, only Theodore lost the largest amount of things, and most of them were not valuable. As if she were the target. Liana assumed it was His Highness the Crown Prince, as he was still targeting her. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lady Natasha, who didn't understand what the maid was thinking. Liana bowed, apologizing and admitting her guilt to her mistress. Lady Natasha heard that something almost happened to her, and that she was probably sad. The aristocrat smiled and said that she seemed to be the lucky one. But she could become a Marchioness, like Natasha's mother. But when Liana combs her hair, the lady can get hurt. The maid darkened, fell silent, and did nothing more. And then Lady Natasha smiled sweetly and said that she was only joking. The aristocrat continued talking about Prince Ilid visiting them in the afternoon. So they needed to take care of their hair. Already in the courtyard, on a bench, Deborah handed cookies to Annie, which Liana immediately thanked her for. She wanted to bring the gift to Phoebe, but her friend demanded that Theodore eat it all herself first and prepare a separate one for her niece. The maid said it was fine and thanked her again. Suddenly, Deborah started telling her that her brother would arrive that day to deliver the purchase. And then Liana was surprised when her friend asked what she thought of her brother. She explained that if Liana had someone who could protect her, she wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. The girl said it didn't have to be Matthew, but if there was at least someone in mind, then it would be good. After trying to say something else, Deborah suddenly started crying. Liana couldn't understand why her friend had that reaction and wanted to say something honestly. At first, Deborah was jealous of Theodore's beauty, but now she worries about her because the people around her are cruel. She said all this because if Liana had worked with Matthew, she would have been less worried about her. Theodore, chuckling, asked her friend to first wipe her shiny face and then help someone. Laughing, the maid said she was really fine. After which the girls hugged tightly and apologized to each other. And after completing a task instead of Deborah, the mistress ran into Matthew. He was the same as always, saying he had bought gifts for Liana and Phoebe. The gift the girl received was exceptionally good for her. Liana wondered what she should think about her feelings. Lady Natasha didn't understand what the prince was thinking, but she couldn't leave the girl in trouble. The girl screamed, because now there are rumors that everything was a trap planned for Benjamin Owen. His Highness calmly informed his interlocutor that nothing could interfere with his plan. Prince Ilid asked Lady Natasha not to go crazy and to sit down again. Looking at her interlocutor, the girl couldn't understand what happened to him during the night. Lady Natasha exhaled because, after all, she needed time to think about her future. His Highness began to wonder if he had another plan, and the lady began to think. The boy never took a sip of tea, having heard that the lady would begin to live as she wanted. Taking a maid with her. The girl understood that if she kicked her out, the prince wouldn't want to follow the aristocrat. And Liana was smart. In the morning, Lady Natasha shouted at her because everything had gone wrong. The aristocrat expected that plan and that she could finally be happy. Or maybe it could be that, having hurt the maid, she wanted to hurt herself. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by the question of whether she would take her maid with her. Lady Natasha understood that she couldn't live alone and would have to take several smart maids with her. His Highness believed this would be the case, looking out the window at something. The aristocrat began to be annoyed by the coldness with which Prince Ilid answered her. But suddenly, the girl became interested in what His Highness was looking at out the window. The prince only wanted to warn her that he hadn't fully regained his senses yet. His Highness realized that Lady Natasha had made a mistake again and demanded that her maid be called. Liana stayed in the hallway, thinking that everything should be in order because she was going to the living room. Not the bedroom. The maid knocked loudly on the door, informing her lady that she had brought her tea. As soon as Theodore entered the room, the aristocrat reminded Prince Ilid that they had a dispute about the maid's name. While waiting for her drink, Lady Natasha offered to find out the results, and if His Highness had won. Liana was silently aware that she had to pretend not to hear, even when she clearly understood what was being said. She needs to pretend when her vision is clear, pretend to be tough and emotionless. Prince Ilid looked at the maid, wondering if they were forbidden to wear accessories in this mansion. But upon hearing that some young gentlemen and ladies even give jewels to their maids, I thought Liana loved simplicity. Unexpectedly, His Highness asked Theodore why she wasn't wearing the hairpin he had given her. Prince Ilith admitted that he hoped she would do it for today. Lady Natasha asked in surprise if this was true, and after a short pause, she heard an affirmative answer. The maid explained that she had done him a small favor before, but for a simple maid, it was too expensive a gift that she could not afford to wear. But the owner suggested that the item was very beautiful and asked her to wear it with pleasure. Liana understood that this was too much for her because she was only a servant. And the prince was Lady Natasha's lover. The girl said she wanted to sell it when she needed money to live. Lady Natasha realized this was very possible because she also had a niece. But Liana knew that the hairpin was stolen, and it would be better if she told them a lie. The girl only wanted to leave, but His Highness began to say that it doesn't matter how simple things she likes. Prince Ili took the girl's hand in his and explained that she only needed to be able to distinguish between feminine and simple. Liana suddenly remembered the stain on her sleeve left from her attempts to calm Deborah. Embarrassed, Liana pulled her hand away, apologizing and promising that everything would be clean next time. His Highness unexpectedly said that he would send the maid a new hairpin, and then asked her to put it on because she was lucky to end up in a mansion where she could wear jewelry. The girl looked at His Highness with surprise and embarrassment, after which Prince Ilid smiled sweetly, wondering if she understood everything. With embarrassment on her face, the maid awkwardly gave a positive answer. Finally, the door slammed shut, and the girl found herself in the hallway. Alone once more, Lady Natasha looked at her interlocutor with dissatisfaction. Noticing the lady's gaze, His Highness asked what was wrong. Lady Natasha remembered that Liana was still her personal maid. Taking a sip of tea, she supposed that the prince wouldn't try to steal something that didn't belong to him without paying. His Highness suggested to his interlocutor that he change his occupation to that of a merchant. Standing up, Lady Natasha admitted that she would have done this, but before she could finish speaking, she noticed how the prince was approaching. The girl couldn't understand what His Highness was doing and asked him to stop. She stroked the aristocrat's cheek and explained that it was a sign of love. Prince Ilid felt he had that right to perform such actions. Suddenly, someone knocked on the open door, to which they both looked back. An embarrassed maid stood in the middle of the room, apologizing and explaining that she just wanted to pick up the tray. Completely embarrassed and blushing, Liana turned around and apologized once more for interrupting. Lady Natasha looked at His Highness, thinking and slowly realizing something. She understood that a man, to get a woman, doesn't have to risk his honor and his dignity. And Liana became a maid who fell for his sharp hook. The girl stayed in the hallway, not believing that she had simply dropped the tray. She realized that she shouldn't have entered the aristocrat's premises at all. She wouldn't have to blush so much if she had returned the clips as soon as she received them. Liana was annoyed that they didn't seem to understand that she was also human. After all, a girl is not a machine that acts according to their wishes and comes. Liana is the same person, with her own feelings and emotions she wants to show. The maid stood up and blushed, because it seemed to her that she didn't understand at all what was happening. It seemed funny to her to feel worse than when she fought with Benjamin, even though His Highness hadn't hurt the girl at all. Prince Ilid simply acted like the man Liana had so carelessly trusted. Suddenly, the girl heard loud shouts and demands to return something. The maid looked down and realized she was hearing a voice that was too familiar. Liana's little niece, with tears in her eyes, demanded that her things be returned. The aristocrat claimed that the baby stole the book from her room because Angelica's name was written there. Phoebe explained that she picked it up from the incinerator where the lady had thrown it. Liana quickly approached them, called her niece, and interrupted their conflict. The maid didn't understand why the youngest one came down, as she promised to sit quietly in the maid's room. But the little one only promised that she wasn't lying and would never steal books. Suddenly, the voice of an aristocrat was heard, who became interested in knowing if Liana was Phoebe's aunt. Lady Angelica claimed that the little one spoke cheekily about picking up the stolen item. She then threw the book she had in mind onto the floor, so that Liana could understand everything exactly. The aristocrat continued saying that Phoebe didn't dare read the language of aristocrats, even being the maid's niece. The girl still claimed that she had actually just picked up a book she didn't need. What was said began to infuriate the aristocrat more and more with every passing second. Lady Angelica thought Phoebe took this book because she could read the language of aristocrats. Starting to speak the language of the nobility, the girl admitted that she really could read. After which Phoebe demanded to apologize to her because she didn't steal anything. This whole situation only infuriated the aristocrat more and more with every passing second. With a cry of dissatisfaction, Lady Angelica asked if the girl knew who was in front of her. Swinging her arms, but unexpectedly, it was Liana who received the slap, pressing her niece closer to her. The maid knelt down, apologizing and admitting her fault and asking to be punished herself. The girl obediently lowered her head in front of the aristocrat, realizing she had to protect Phoebe. She was willing to do anything for her niece, and even if she were kicked out, it would be enough for her to receive at least a letter of recommendation. Liana had to listen to the fact that she was the maid, for whom a drugged man was probably an easy catch. After mocking how much Phoebe must have studied to be the niece of a woman blinded by her status advancement. Suddenly, Liana was surprised by the question of whether she would send the baby to a good place as a concubine when she learned the aristocratic language. Lady Angelica explained that Phoebe wouldn't have to wait long, because there were men for every taste in the world. Liana's fists clenched at the words that the baby would have fun since she could speak Edil. Finally, unable to withstand the intimidation, Theodore screamed, interrupting the aristocrat. Lady Angelica mockingly asked if Natasha's maid wanted to say something. Liana unexpectedly began to say that she perfectly understood her interlocutor's preference for men, none of which corresponded to her feelings. And then she said that all the maids knew the content of the love letter to Viscount Thompson. The girl began to stand up, suggesting that someone might have stolen the note that the Viscount threw in the trash. The maid remembered how Lady Angelica even described her belongings in detail to her. Liana understood that for the nobility they are like furniture, without thoughts or intelligence, although they are also people who have ears and eyes. The maid boldly suggested to the aristocrat's face that this had probably happened not only to Thompson. The girl remembered again that Lady Angelica sent that letter not only to the Viscount. The aristocrat began to tremble with anger at her interlocutor and her words. Finally, Liana announced that she didn't have to give a letter of recommendation because she was not going to stay in this place any longer. The aristocrat demanded to grab the maid while she calmly took her niece. The girl wondered if Phoebe would mind living in a hotel now. The girl asked in surprise if they would live with Sonia now and heard an affirmative answer. After which, with a bright smile, she said that she liked living anywhere, as long as she was with her aunt. The girl smiled back at the baby, wishing the same and understanding that she would allow herself to be humiliated because it would hurt her niece. Suddenly, an imperial knight appeared in front of them, demanding that they stop. Behind the girls, Lady Angelica was shouting that they should be captured and judged for insulting an aristocrat. The imperial knight recognized Baldwin's eldest daughter, and she immediately ordered with joy, "I will go see Liana." But suddenly, they informed her that she had been arrested on charges of trafficking and drug use. The imperial knights grabbed the aristocrat by the arms and decided to take her to the lobby. Liana and her niece simply remained close by, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, Deborah called them and asked them to come to her quickly. The girls ran, talking about how the Count seemed to have done something unimaginable. Deborah looked around and also noticed an imperial order underneath. The Baldwin family knelt before the imperial knight. Count Jack's face darkened when he heard the words that they had been arrested on drug trafficking charges. The aristocrat began to assert that all this was slander by Marquis Owen, because he had never done such a thing. Liana turned around. She definitely heard what they were saying about the whole family. But for some reason, Lady Natasha was nowhere near. The man began to shout that he had no idea who was supposed to spread these false rumors. But suddenly, Prince Ilid interrupted him, believing it would be better if the Count remained silent. Otherwise, he would insult the imperial family. Everyone around them began to wonder why His Highness was here. Prince Ilid smiled, delighted by their exclamations. The boy explained that he was not the main character that day and led the lady upstairs by the hand. Finally, with a measured step, Lady Natasha appeared. The Count was already delighted and asked his daughter to explain everything to His Highness. How falsely she had been accused. The man explained that he needed Natasha to help him and free his family. But the girl unexpectedly interrupted her father and asked if he remembered the dress she was wearing. Lady Natasha explained that this was what her mother was wearing when she committed suicide. Count Jack clumsily said he was very sorry. It seemed to him that she misunderstood something because her mother was mentally ill. Lady Natasha was surprised that the man understood nothing because it was revenge for her mother. The aristocrat admitted that she had been praying every day for this day to come as soon as possible since finding her mother's diary. The girl said she knew everything about how Jack sold his mother just to expand his business. After all, the Count married a low-born servant, achieved success, and started a family. This is what Lady Natasha wanted from the beginning, from the moment she approached the innocent maid with her dirty intentions. Suddenly, Angelique also spoke, wondering if her sister really thought everything would be fine for her. The girl shouted that her father had taken in a poor commoner and allowed her to live like an aristocrat. Lady Natasha calmly announced that she would leave now and become a poor commoner again. The aristocrat laughed at the fact that she would definitely visit her sister, because she would have to spend a long time in prison for life. Lady Angelica trembled with anger and didn't understand how Natasha could do this to her family. The girl could be calm because her revenge had finally come to an end. One of the imperial knights announced that Lady Natasha would also have to go with them, after which she was surprised by the words that she would be with them, not as a witness, but as a criminal. The knight explained that she was being arrested for tax evasion and for using an account with a fake name. The girl screamed as she carefully read and noticed the seal of the imperial family. Lady Natasha grabbed the piece of paper in her hand and turned towards His Highness. Prince Wiley reminded his interlocutor that there was only one condition in the contract. The girl was not happy because she always did everything in her power to help His Highness. And then she was surprised how the boy knew she had an alternative plan. Suddenly, Lady Natasha remembered the moment the prince asked to call his maid. The girl remembered that Liana, that girl, was supposed to pass the note. Slowly getting into the carriage, the aristocrat promised that His Highness would still regret it. She was sure that someday he too would be in her place and would have no choice but to obey. His Highness doubted that day could ever come. Deborah wondered what Liana was going to do now, but she was prepared for anything. The girl didn't understand how it was possible to lose her job in an instant, because she didn't even receive a letter of recommendation. Deborah would have stolen the jewels from the lady's room if she had known this would happen. But Liana immediately realized that nothing would have worked, because there were no jewels there. Theodore at that moment managed to look around Lady Natasha's room a little. All the valuables from her wardrobe are gone. Liana is sure that the aristocrat took everything herself. The Count didn't even pay the maids for their work, but if you add up the full salary, it will be enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Liana understood that they should be worried because they didn't even have a letter of recommendation. Finally, someone entered the hotel, and the girl approached to greet him. Theodore was interested to know if they wanted to stay with them or use the restaurant services. But suddenly, she recognized the newcomer as Mr. Arkin, who smiled at her so friendly. To Deborah's questions, the girl replied that she had met him once in the capital. The girl began to apply lipstick, understanding why her friend disliked her brother. Deborah admitted that a man with that face was 100 times better than Matthew. Liana didn't understand what she was talking about and why she suddenly decided to put on makeup. Deborah laughed and said that she would take care of the brown-haired man and leave Mr. Arkan to her friend. Theodore realized that her friend had misunderstood everything, but she was already cheerfully greeting the guests. Liana watched her friend and realized that her behavior was already too much. Mr. Arkand silently watched the girl while she looked at him incomprehensibly. But suddenly, he decided to ask her if the boy needed anything else. Mr. Arkham only asked her if she had been all right all this time. Liana said everything was fine and then asked about his life. The girl noticed with a smile that the knight's knowledge of the imperial language had improved. Arkham awkwardly asked if Theodore had already had dinner and heard an affirmative answer. The boy was a little annoyed that Liana had already tasted something. Suddenly, Deborah shouted that the dish was ready. The two girls talked about whether the guests would like the food. They realized this could be understood just by looking at their faces during lunch. Both boys immediately realized how spicy it was, although they only ate one spoonful. The brown-haired man began to speak in the Edil language about how this was like an assassination attempt, listening in response to requests to calm down. He explained that not only deadly poison can kill a person. Suddenly, Phoebe appeared near the table and asked in the same language if the prince was really sitting there. The brown-haired man was immediately surprised that such a small girl understood the Edil language. He asked the girl in surprise where she had learned this. For Mr. Arkan, it was amazing, and he understood that what the little one said must have been difficult, which made the little one embarrassed. But at the same time, Phoebe said that her aunt calls her genius. The baby cheerfully pointed at her relative and called her the most beautiful in the world. Mr. Arkham confirmed Phoebe's words and added that she was very similar to her aunt. The girl was surprised that the prince knew Liana while messing up her hair. Suddenly, Mr. Arkham asked if he could ask the baby for a favor. Already on the snowy street, the man called Liana to come closer to him. Theodore wondered if the other person wanted to tell her something. Mr. Arkham froze, lowered his eyes, and felt a blush on his cheeks, unable to say anything. Finally, the man made up his mind, pulling a small piece of paper from his pants pocket. He began to read quickly that, after thinking everything over carefully, he would like to take Liana to the kingdom, where she would have a good life. Theodore hastily stopped the flow of his interlocutor's words, asking only to wait a little. The girl asked Mr. Arkin to speak a little slower so she could understand something. Liana asked if he really wanted to take her with him to the kingdom of Etzla. The boy promised her that if she worked there as a maid, she would have a much better life. He thought that Liana was a very capable and sincere person, so she should consider this offer. The girl thought that the master only wanted to take her with him as a servant. And suddenly, she asked him why he wanted to take her to the Edil Palace. Mr. Arkham began to explain that she was an honest and talented girl who also sincerely cared about the lady. Liana realized with shame how devoted she had appeared in his eyes all that time. Theodore thanked his interlocutor for such a good opinion, but she had one more question. Mr. Arkham was stunned by the question of how he knew that the lady was raising her niece. Liana put all the details into one, only not understanding how he found out about Phoebe. And this place. Mr. Arkan did not know what to answer and looked away. And then the man completely turned his head, pretending not to understand what she was talking about. Liana explained that she could not go to work for an employer who lied to her from the beginning, and even less so if it was so far away. Seeing the knight's anguish, the girl began to say that she understood everything because he was the prince of the kingdom. And he could very well check her past for his safety, but no matter how much he thinks about it, he still cannot understand why they want to take her with them. After which, Liana was surprised by the words that there was no one like her in Edil. Already talking with her friend, Deborah was surprised by the story and the words that they wanted to take Theodore away. The girl screamed upon hearing that Liana would give an exact answer, only in a week. Deborah did not understand her at all, because it was about a salary increase and status. Liana was interested in the words that there was something she had to find out. Deborah needed to know for sure if her friend could take her with her. The girl asked Theodore to take her with her under the pretext that she would definitely feel less lonely and bored. Suddenly, Deborah began to tell why Arkan decided to take his friend away, because there were many different maids around. Liana looked away, embarrassed to say it herself. She said that Mr. Arkan said she was sincere and competent. Deborah sighed heavily, because her tongue was itching to say that maybe that wasn't the case. In the palace, Prince Ilid discussed the fact that he was going to install that maid in the palace. His Highness explained that he would not make her his mistress, because then he would have to get married. The servant explained that then the aristocrats and other maids, who had done so much to get here, would be angry. After which he decided to ask if Prince Elide had requested the girl's consent. His Highness said that she was not in the best position to choose. Sharon firmly explained to him that Prince Elide could not do whatever he wanted. The aristocrat understood and said that at least the girl had a good disposition towards him. And then His Highness suddenly remembered that he was wearing pink underwear. Sharon screamed upon hearing the order not to leave the girl no choice, but to say yes. Prince Elide sincerely did not understand what the problem was, because she would enjoy the material wealth. Unlike the way she lives now. Sharon could only exhale with irritation and hold her head. Prince Elide remembered that he would be kind to others, even if they had not received the blessing that he takes for granted. He is an adult now and therefore will no longer treat everything as a joke. After which His Highness removed the tunic that was so cumbersome. Sharon screamed, asking him at least to be ashamed, although this was not the first time she had seen the prince naked. His Highness reminded his interlocutor that he could not sleep dressed. The aristocrat wanted to sleep more and asked to see her during the day. Sharon, whom they didn't want to listen to, finally said that she would send a man to where the maid was staying. And she would try to investigate the situation. The prince said that after this, he went to visit her alone. Finally, he left the room, realizing that he hated His Highness at that moment. Sharon's mother was the nanny who raised the prince, and together they went from childhood to studying at the academy. She had been taking care of Prince Elide for more than 20 years until today. His Highness is truly a worthy employer. He is a good friend. But he was insensitive and could easily ignore other people's feelings before. Even if Elide fully understands other people's feelings, he is just trying to use them. Heartless, as a result of overly ideal conditions, the prince is a man who has never experienced any hardship or injury. Cheryl realized that this might be because he didn't have that experience. His Highness tries to use even the girl he likes. At this rate, he will remain an emotionless scoundrel for the rest of his life. At a minimum, if His Highness noticed and understood the feeling of love, a time would come when he would need help. As a servant and friend, Sharon will do everything in her power to help him. Suddenly, the prince woke up in the middle of the night, feeling that his whole body ached and moving. His Highness could not understand what kind of sound was heard around him. Prince Elide felt his head ringing and his vision blurring. Realizing he needed to call someone, he barely reached the bell. The sound was too loud for His Highness, which made him clutch his head. Hearing the bell, Sharon rushed into the room and looked around. She tried to find out what was wrong with the prince, but he sat silently, with his head down and ears plugged. Sharon promised that she would immediately call a doctor for His Highness. The aristocrat felt how cold and sick he was from being somewhere far from reality. His Highness just felt like he wanted to run away from this place. And suddenly, Manish woke up. The seventh's ability turned into fire. As a result of the powerful self-ignition explosion, the fire destroyed countless people without a trace. At the meeting, His Majesty now had to make some decision. One of those present explained that personal emotions are the worst enemy. The security of the entire empire is at stake. The crown prince, who understood that Manish, who had lost Ariadne, needed to be dealt with before he went crazy, began to speak. Everyone understood that the need to silently endure the death of a loved one was an incomparable pain. He said that stories say Manish is born once every 100 years. Everyone discussed that Manish's appearance was a secret to everyone, but this time he appeared too quickly. The boy also did not want to risk his brother, but the emperor taught him that everyone in the imperial palace fulfills their duties. After which it was time for His Majesty to finally make a decision. They only had one reason to hide that Manish's appearance was unstable. And all because the number of Manish and Ariadne did not match. When Manish appears, an oracle descends into the temple of Ethel, who reports the existence of Ariadne. It happened that only one of them was born, or the lady was frequently questioned for 5 days before making sure they were safe. Because they were capable of driving, most manishas died during these 5 days because Ariadne was missing, or they couldn't find her. There are also times when Ariadne, who was found in better condition, rejects the boy. His Majesty began to say that the destructive power of Manish is not something that people can stop. The Crown Prince said that despite the pressure, nothing has been heard from the temple for 2 days. Unexpectedly, His Majesty decided that Manish would remain locked up. He explained this by saying that it would be possible to minimize the associated damage. Suddenly, a servant entered the room and loudly called His Majesty. He knelt down, apologized, and explained that he had an urgent message. The servant handed a package to the man and told him that a letter had arrived from Etla. His Majesty took and unfolded the paper in silence, beginning to calmly read what was written on it. Suddenly, he looked up at those present, saying that the oracle had appeared. At that moment, his companions were asking Liana where she was going. They were surprised that it was to the village of Tamira, because it is quite a remote place. Clumsily, Theodore thanked them for their concern and smiled slightly. The girl realized that she should have looked there at least once before heading to Etla. Deborah also insisted that she would go with them. And besides, it would be useful for Phoebe's education, because she could attend school there. Moreover, the little one expressed her desire to go and knows the language of the kingdom well. Maybe Phoebe can achieve a lot thanks to her self-confidence. The girl realized that she wanted to make her niece happy. For this, they will have to leave their native soil for a long time. But at the same time, Liana was sad about something, because she would no longer see Her Highness Ilid if she went to Etla. But it will be better this way, because she won't be able to see the prince and her feelings will soon fade. Someday this heart will eventually be freed from what it once dreamed of. Theodore remembered her father's words about how ungrateful children were. The man couldn't find the 2 girls hiding from him around the corner. At the first opportunity, Liana and her older sister ran as far and as fast as possible. Suddenly, an unknown woman called softly to the 2 girls. She didn't understand why those children were walking the streets at such a late hour and where their parents were. The woman offered them her hand and asked if they were all right. The sisters were surprised and distrustful of the stranger's kindness and looked at her in silence. The next day, the girls were sitting at the table, eating in a hurry. After eating, they were immediately introduced to Jen, the aunt's son, hoping they would become friends. Having matured a bit, the 3 went for a walk in the garden, where Louis often argued with the boy. Liana realized that she couldn't argue with them, getting along. This finally led Louis to marry the general. At their wedding, the girls shouted loud congratulations, sincerely happy for both. A couple of years later, their couple had a beautiful baby whom everyone was happy about. Liana admired how pretty her daughter was now. Everyone walked together and spent time with little Phoebe. But suddenly death itself came to their large family, taking everyone in turn. Louis lived with great difficulty the death of her husband, whom she loved so much. In the end there were 2. Only Liana and Phoebe were alone in the whole world. Everyone around them looked at them with condemnation because they came from the village of Tamira, where an epidemic was raging. Those around them called them dirty carriers of the disease and demanded that they leave. Suddenly, Liana woke up and realized that everything had just been a terrible dream. The girls slept so much that the lunchbox Aunt Sonia had packed was already cold. Liana was sincerely happy when the woman showed kindness towards them and protected them. It was at that moment that they were truly on the edge. Only the aunt's family, who knew nothing about them, showed kindness and based on this. She gradually began to hide her secret. Liana didn't want them to know that the girls were from the village of Tamira and that their presence could cause them to contract the same illness. It was also that they could survive, because Phoebe was sick and her aunt wanted to save her. Theodore was lucky that none of them died, which was a great relief. The girl was carried away by thoughts of what could have happened if they had been unlucky at that moment. Finally, Liana arrived at the right place, holding a bouquet of flowers in her hands. The girl knelt in front of her sister's monument and told her she had returned. Liana talked about how Phoebe is a smart girl and more like herself. As she continued her story, she realized that it felt like she was truly talking to her sister. She was sad because she was saying all this 5 years after her death. Liana remembered her brother's words that looks are important if you're going to meet a handsome boy. Theodore admitted that she used to like handsome people, but this was too much for her. It's something she can't afford anyway, but she keeps getting greedy. Maybe next time, she will like someone who is not as handsome as her brother-in-law. Suddenly, a small leaf flew onto her face again, causing the girl to laugh. Liana wiped away her tears and realized she felt much better. Theodore got up, dusted off her dress, and realized it was time for her to leave. Suddenly, Liana heard shouts asking her to stand still. The girls saw the Imperial Knights on horseback behind her. They began to ask her if she was Lyanna Theodore, who previously worked for Count Baldwin. They told her that Ilid had awakened as mannish, so by order of the priest. She is the only one who can calm him down. The girls asked her if she had heard everything correctly while they were leading her away. The Imperial Knights apologized to her, promising to explain everything on the way. Because they were in a hurry. And then Liana thought about His Highness, not understanding what happened to him. There are only 3 days left before Prince Ilid's death, during which he will be chained on the mountain. Suddenly, his brother approached his cage and noticed how bad he looked. The crown prince took over all the damages and had to shell out a considerable sum to console the families of the servants whom Elide had burned alive. But some have lost their children, others have lost their parents, and unfortunately, money cannot fill the void of losing a loved one. After which, the boy remembered Sharon's death, who always followed Elide. The brother kept talking about how he still didn't remember the names of the maids. Prince Elide always behaved as if he were the center of the world. To him, other people were just a means to stand out from the crowd. The boy wondered if his brother remembered the day he was crowned, because then he thought he had won. But he quickly realized that the brutal battle for the heir's place was just entertainment for Elide. But now he has the opportunity to defeat his brother, who is chained. If you think about it, the oracle gave a prophecy saying that Ariadne is also in this empire. However, the crown prince asked his brother to wake up and not have silly hopes. He asked Ilid to understand that Ariadne was unlikely to be near Mannish. Or maybe they won't find her at all, because the oracle said that among the 100,000 women who feel love for him, she is the one. Before leaving, the boy realized that the next few days were going to be quite fun. The right girl for the role of Ariadne screamed that she didn't want to die. They calmed her down and took her to Mannish, telling her that even if she suffered a little, they would treat her immediately. The girl screamed that she didn't like him, because that wasn't her Ilid at all. Lady Natasha was interested in what His Highness was thinking at that moment. The girl was unsuccessful, and the next one called was the aristocrat. She mockingly asked if Prince Ilid was all right looking at him. The girl found it funny that he said he would never in his life be in the submissive party's place. Observing his pitiful appearance, Lady Natasha realized that there was no need for revenge. The aristocrat knew that no matter how strong Mannish was, without Ariadne he was nothing. Lady Natasha was afraid of losing her hand if she touched Prince Ilid. The aristocrat touched her cheek, doubting that anyone would want to live with a monster like him. One of the ladies didn't understand why the line was so long, because she had gotten this far because of the words that she was the only Ariadne. Liana silently observed the scandal unfolding between the aristocrat and the knight. Theodore realized that if she had been told she was one of many candidates, she wouldn't have followed them. Liana looked at the long line in front of her and realized that somewhere ahead was His Highness. Suddenly, Mr. Arkin called the girl, and she hurriedly ran towards him. The boy asked Liana not to go anywhere, because she was definitely not Ariadne. Theodore couldn't understand where Mr. Arkin got such confidence in this. She thought something was wrong with the temple or the kingdom, but they only asked her not to leave. The chestnut-haired man shouted to the Imperial Knight that they wanted to take Liana Theodore away. And leave. The girl couldn't understand at all how they knew where she was and what was going on. Mr. Arkham shouted when he heard that the lady wanted to check everything personally. If this is her destiny and she turns out to be Ariadne, then he will have to find her halfway. Even if she is not the only one, it is okay if she is not special. Liana smiled cheerfully and promised Mr. Arkham that she would return to him soon. But she still begged the girl not to go with His Highness, wanting to stop. And Lid realized that all this would end soon. She could finally get rid of everything. Mentally, she told her father that he no longer held the position of Prince of the Empire. His entire world is destroyed. There is no second prince left who doesn't know what he's losing. That Manish was an impressive being is only a legend. Only those who survive this smell of burnt flesh will receive such praise. As well as the sad love letter the lady wrote to him. Or maybe the kind eyes with which she looked at His Highness Ilid. In this terrible fire, only a handful of ashes will remain. She didn't understand why Manish had to wake him up and go through this pain. His Highness Ilid is the one who turned out to be an ideal presence, thanks to everything he managed to do. So he shouldn't even expect something like those Imperial Knights. Or maybe he won't feel as human as these girls. This is the last night, and the last group that will soon reach her. After 10 explosions, the bars will be thrown off the cliff without hesitation. And only then can they get rid of all this pain. Finally, it was Liana Theodore's turn, who looked at His Highness in horror. That miserable feeling that Prince Ilid thought he was over returned again. His Highness believed that he felt sick because of the dirt. The prince would like Liana to simply ignore him, just as she did before. The boy was worried about how ugly Theodore might find him. In fact, the prince specifically helped Natasha destroy Baldwin. He wanted the girl to be in his arms, and only for this reason Elide tried to reunite with her. Inventing ridiculous excuses. His Highness did not expect everything to be in vain and to end like this. To Prince Elide's discontent, this was a real pity. Liana said that even if it wasn't her, His Highness could still find his Ariadne. For the prince, the end was already an inevitable conclusion, because the lady would leave. And they would leave him to die. And Lid managed to notice that Theodore had quite a pleasant and affectionate look. Suddenly, the prince's eyes widened, and he realized he was trying to survive out of fear of death. But Liana looks at His Highness with wide and lively eyes. For some reason, even in such a situation, she can hurt his pride. In fact, Prince Ilid also wants to live as a person. His Highness thought about what would happen if God gave him another chance. Suddenly, a bright glow appeared in the cell and continued to grow. And suddenly the guy was free. His arms and legs were no longer chained. His Highness also realized that his ears were finally no longer ringing, and with this, all feelings returned to normal. And Prince Ilid no longer feels any pain. Now he could understand that these were precisely the powers of his Ariadne. Liana was abruptly thrown away from His Highness and began to fall backwards. Prince Ilid shouted, noticing the fall, and quickly approached the girl. His Highness was still able to catch Theodore at the last moment. The bright glow surrounding them completely disappeared, and the girl was in Prince Ilid's arms. His Highness experienced a strange feeling, as if the whole world had stopped. And it was just the two of them. Now he realized that it was her, Liana, his only one. Prince Ilid was glad to have finally touched her, but he didn't understand why he had arrived so late. The boy remembered Lady Natasha's words about the monster he really was. Prince Ilid knew that now he couldn't scare her away. His hands were shaking, but he tried to touch Liana carefully and gently. His Highness asked Theodore never to leave him alone again. He wanted her to be his god who could take care of him while keeping him tied up. Finally, the ceremony of appointing the new empress of their kingdom followed. Now Liana Theodore will become the only empress of the Cadogan Empire. All that bright light coming through the stained glass windows, the name resonated in the majestic hall. Even the crown seems terribly heavy, and everything around her is very new. And unusual. And only Ilid's fingertips in the imperial gloves trembled slightly. Liana dared to feel the same way about him without realizing it. It was probably at that moment that Theodore felt so deeply moved. And she will never forget that moment in her life. Suddenly, the voice of a maid calling the Empress pulled her out of her thoughts. She was informed that everything was ready, and she could now leave the bathroom. Becoming Empress meant entering into a formal marital relationship with the Emperor. The final goal of the ceremony was to celebrate the first wedding night. Liana looked at the floor, not knowing what to do while the maid combed her long hair. She couldn't even look forward to marrying a man who begged her to forget him quickly. Liana's heart skipped a beat in her chest, and a slight blush appeared on her face. The girl believed that Ilid disliked this whole situation. She was afraid of being rejected, of him not liking her, because Theodore was just a maid. At least he won't say no to the girl, because Manish definitely needs contact with Ariadne. Already in the room, they sat silently next to each other, unable to find words. Suddenly, Ilith began to wonder if Liana could drink alcohol. Hearing an affirmative answer from her, the now emperor handed a glass to the lady. Liana accepted the drink, taking a small sip under the boy's watchful eye. After emptying the entire glass at once, the girl asked for more to be poured. Every time she emptied her glass, Liana asked for a little more to be poured. Intoxicated, she finally asked if Ilith agreed with the fact that she was now empress. In response, the emperor decided to simply take the bottle away from Liana, realizing that she had had enough. The girl objected, saying she wasn't drunk, and demanded an answer to her question. Ilid immediately explained that neither he nor she had any other choice. Whatever she says, nothing will change, which means it's pointless. After these words, Liana sank, moving away from her interlocutor. The girl spilled alcohol beyond the glass, realizing that now both the floor and the table were dirty. Liana immediately apologized to Ilid and stood up to clean everything. The emperor stopped her and told her that the maids would clean everything in the morning. The girl heard Ilid sigh heavily, realizing that he was tired of her. She realized that she really looked pathetic because she couldn't even serve herself alcohol properly. Unexpectedly, Ilid said that, in his opinion, the girl was too thin. The boy quickly approached the surprised Liana, examining her. Without another word, he touched her lips with his own, melting into a kiss. After a couple more moments, Ilid quickly laid his companion on her back. The girl asked him to wait a little, but the emperor quickly interrupted her, demanding to call him by his name. Without waiting for a response, Ilith began to kiss his empress's neck. He removed the blindfold with his teeth and paused briefly. And then he touched her lips again, moving closer and closer to Liana's body. Finally, clumsily, the girl managed to say his name, only blushing harder. In those moments, Liana realized that she wanted to tell Ilid many things. The empress was eager to get drunk, although she doesn't actually know how to drink anything. She thought that if they did this, they could be honest with each other. Liana realized that she really liked everything and was happy to be close to him. All this time, the girl had been yearning for something like this, even if Eli didn't want it. Even if he didn't feel the same way. But a little more is needed, and they will definitely always be together. Liana still felt that even this was not enough for her. Finally, the girl fell asleep, and Ilid carefully covered her with a blanket. He noticed a bruise on Liana's arms, which he himself left with his grip. In the morning, the girl felt that her whole body ached and hurt, making it difficult for her to even turn over. But suddenly, remembering the night with the emperor, Liana sat up in the same bed. The girl immediately began to clumsily say what mistake she had made that night. But suddenly, the empress realized and noticed that she was completely alone in bed. The head maid entered the room and heard Liana cough. The woman said that at night, the emperor slept in a separate bedroom and was now busy with political matters. The maid suggested opening the curtains since Liana was already awake, but immediately heard a negative response. The empress was afraid to imagine how she would look after last night with Ilith. The girl was glad they allowed her to wash alone in the bathroom and did not insist. Liana understood that she simply couldn't show the traces of her night to the maids. But if she thought about it, at dawn, it seemed to her that someone was watching her. The empress really wondered if Ilith was worried about her. Still, Liana didn't understand how someone could break the bed's railing enclosure. At the same time, she didn't expect so many traces to remain, as she was completely drunk at night. Covered in a bright blush, Liana lowered her face under the water, hoping she hadn't done anything. Already in the living room, the girl was served tea, which Ili himself sent, recommending she drink it. After which, Liana began to wonder where Phoebe was. They explained that her niece was currently staying in a guest house in the capital, because the annex where she would live was not yet equipped. And subsequently, according to the Empress's opinions, new residency rules may be introduced. And Phoebe will be able to stay in the imperial palace. After drinking the tea, Liana realized she would have to thank Ilid. The head cleaning lady kindly asked if the girl needed anything else. After asking the woman to bring books on etiquette, Liana leaned back on the sofa and exhaled. For the girl, the main thing was that Phoebe was doing well, and she shouldn't feel ashamed of becoming the Empress's niece. She didn't understand at all what her future destiny would be now. It would be a lie if Liana said she wasn't feeling desperate and scared. But now the Empress must do everything in her power, not only for herself, but also for Phoebe. Unlike that time, Liana is no longer alone. The girl realized that she had to go and do something as Empress. Liana was surprised to hear that she didn't have to do anything at all. The maids explained that the girl should simply relax. Now all she has to do is take care of her health and nothing more. The imperial family of the Cadogan Empire is not short of manpower. Liana was told that she was the Empress and should not be held responsible for anything. The girl fell silent, truly understanding the meaning of such an attitude towards her. They have no intention of accepting Liana as an Empress who was a maid. Theodore couldn't believe she was unknowingly studying so hard. The girl feared that Ilith wouldn't like her because they forced him to marry her and become emperor. Or maybe later, he asked to take a queen who would play the role of a real empress. The annoyed girl didn't understand what to do if this happened. Liana began to feel quite strange and uncomfortable in that place. Ilid noticed how strange it was that the memories of the other Ariadne candidates had been erased. But they couldn't erase the memory of their empress. The man in front of him clumsily explained that Ariadne is a rather special creature, and that her divine power is closely related to her memory. Moreover, since Ilid himself had just awakened as Manish, he would not need to act radically. The emperor realized that the empress had no choice but to remember everything that happened. When asked about the temple's budget, Cadogan explained that he needed to think about it a little longer. His Highness Ilid did not know if such a large budget was needed for a temple that could not bear what he persistently asked for. Evidently. After that, without uttering a word, the emperor turned around and headed straight for the exit. While they were asked to wait a little longer, trying to explain something. Finally, His Highness walked down the luxurious corridor with his assistant, thinking. And Lid turned his head towards the boy behind him, wanting to call Sharon, who was always by his side, but immediately fell silent, remembering and realizing that his loyal friend and assistant was already dead. The guy stopped and abruptly asked the servant about the tea, to which he, not understanding at first. He asked again what His Majesty meant. The emperor looked irritably at his new assistant without uttering a single word. Realizing something, the girl began to tell him that the maid had already reported seeing His Majesty drink all the tea Ilith mentioned. The assistant promised that he would tell the maids to regularly give Liana this drink. After these words, the emperor silently moved away from him, making no further move. And Lid was lost in thought, looking impassively at the floor. Cadogan reminded himself of the night he spent with the new empress. Even in a dark night, the marks all over Liana's body were clearly visible. That night, the boy looked with fear at what he himself had created, thinking that he had truly become the terrible monster everyone talked about. The emperor considered himself a terrible monster, who left Liana only with many scars. Finally emerging from his thoughts, Ilith continued his way towards the long and luxurious corridor. That night, it was obvious from the Empress's face that she was very worried about what might happen. Unlike her, throughout the entire coronation ceremony, Ilid only looked forward to that night. The Emperor realized that this was not an ordinary feeling of anticipation. He felt it all, he felt how thin she was. This was the fear that Ilid suppressed with such difficulty, fearing that he might break such a fragile girl. The emperor realized that if he was distracted for just a second, Liana could get hurt. For he needed to touch the lady with all his caution. But only after seeing what he did to the empress's body, Ilid practically fled that bedroom. His Majesty was already aware of how the girl might react when she woke up and saw her own body. The boy immediately decided that it was not worth spoiling the mood of either him or her on the first day after the coronation. But suddenly Ilid stopped, realizing that even if her body was in order, he could never fall asleep next to her. The emperor remembered his brother's words and finally understood what he was talking about on the cliff. He was overwhelmed by the thought that Liana only sympathized with him because he had fallen so much in love with the lady's eyes. His Majesty believed that in the end, as befits Manish, he would live according to his instinct and subsequently kill Ariadne. But suddenly, Ilid was pulled out of his thoughts by the words about a suddenly appearing fire. The emperor cursed under his breath as he regained control of his powers. Standing in front of the mirror in his dressing room, Ilid thought that perhaps his brother was right. After all, being a maid, Liana always took care of him, but that was before everything turned out so unexpectedly for both of them. The emperor was sincerely glad that he had not personally heard the girl say that she disliked being near him. At the same time, Ilid realized that nothing could be done because fate could not be reversed. Whether he likes it or not, Liana will have to accept his Majesty, but no matter how much the boy tries, he won't be able to change anything. Ilid's pride and other nonsense are completely exhausted. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, the emperor decided that he could try to play his former self. His Majesty can try to once again become that insolent second prince, an arrogant one who died on the Solent crest. If Ilid gives it back to Liana, then maybe she won't be so afraid of him anymore. While in the days when the girl was just a simple maid, she will finally see the emperor as a human again. Even if Ilith is just a weak and shameless beast, he will stand in front of Liana as if everything were absolutely normal. Entering the room, the boy finally decided that at least in front of her, he would look quite proud. Hearing the sound of the door opening, Liana turned around and noticed the conceited emperor in front of her. The girl stood up, quickly closing the book in front of her and with a slight smile, wondering if Ilid had finished his affairs yet. The emperor noticed that Liana had been reading a book before his arrival and admitted that she was still unfamiliar with palace etiquette, which made her quite uncomfortable. Ilith picked up one of the books, read it, and wondered if they would be too heavy for the girl. After which he suddenly heard words of thanks. He put the book back in its place. He asked again. Ileana explained that Phoebe was supposed to live in the capital's guest house. But it turned out that the emperor allowed her to live in the palace. His Majesty looked at the empress with incomprehension, not knowing what was wrong with this, and why they should be grateful for it. The girl clumsily explained that this was an advantage for her, so it was more correct to thank Ilid for this. The emperor moved away from his interlocutor, reporting that he was only doing what he had to do. His Majesty could not understand if the girl loved her niece so much, or if she simply considered Ilid's action inappropriate in this situation. Finally, deciding to speak, the emperor noticed how much Liana cared about her niece. The empress approached and said with a smile that Phoebe was her last blood relative. Liana explained that this was why she really wanted to thank His Majesty, because you always want to see your own family as often as possible. And Lid realized that the empress was very attached to her blood relatives. The boy knew that he wouldn't mind at all even if his relative died in front of his eyes, because both his brother and father calmly watched while he was kept in a cage. The emperor himself only had her, Liana, which actually irritated him terribly. It suddenly occurred to him that perhaps this niece should disappear for everything to be fairer. And then the emperor's eyes widened, and he realized what he had just been thinking. And Alid knew that such thoughts were not considered normal, and ideas crept into his head. And desires are too crazy. The girl asked if the interlocutor had said anything, and it seemed to her that he heard everything she was thinking. The boy's body began to tremble. And Alid couldn't understand at all what the point was in him, taking so long to decide to speak in the morning. The emperor began to realize that he could not change, no matter how many masks he put on. He could not hide the monster within him, and the same instinct he felt on the cliff would always be with him. But unexpectedly, Liana gently tugged at His Highness's sleeve, calling him softly, and bringing him back to consciousness. The girl looked at her interlocutor with concern, wondering what had suddenly happened to him. His Majesty closed his eyes and exhaled loudly, remembering that he was still next to Liana. And her presence proved that he was not yet completely broken. Not hearing any answer from the emperor, the girl continued to ask him if he hurt anywhere. And Lid only said it was nothing, realizing that everything would be fine because Liana was by his side. And she could control him. Control him. Unexpectedly for both of them, the Empress suggested that there was a possibility that the boy had not fully calmed down after what happened. After the words were spoken, a stupid and awkward silence fell in the room, as everyone tried to understand what was happening. Suddenly, the girl realized something and quickly began to explain that time was almost up. That's why she was saying all this. Liana quickly talked about what the priest taught her, because the sacred power in Manish's body is like water that Ariadne must constantly replenish. But unexpectedly, the emperor interrupted the interlocutor, moving away from her, and starting to laugh softly. To Liana's questions, Idlid replied with the same laughter that it was nothing, explaining that today was the first day of his duties. And he was really very busy. The Empress exhaled deeply and clumsily said that if everything was true, then she would be happy. And Lid slowly touched the girl's hand, wondering how she would feel now, because he probably had a hard time last night. And then he completely joined their hands, hovering over Liana and continuing to ask if she had any pain anywhere. Given such closeness, the entire face of the Empress was covered with a bright blush. And she began to affirm that everything was fine, realizing that she needed to mentally prepare for such closeness. His Majesty looked at his interlocutor in disbelief, believing that something still hurt her. And Lid asked to be allowed to take a look, running his hand over the hem of her dress, which made Liana not understand what he wanted. Not receiving an answer from the emperor, the girl felt abruptly rejected. His Majesty hovered silently over his Empress, examining her and reflecting on his actions. And Lid began to stroke the girl's body until she couldn't understand what he was trying to achieve, and asked her to wait a little. Liana went crazy from the emperor's unexpected touches, and her face was still covered in a bright blush from extreme embarrassment due to the current situation. And Lid was interested in whether the girl felt hurt by his touch, and immediately heard a negative response from her. The emperor unexpectedly offered to heal Liana, which surprised her again at such words. His Majesty carefully removed the little shoe from the girl, saying it would be better for him to do it himself than for someone else. After which, the emperor, with a malicious smile, asked if Liana herself thought the same. The girl couldn't find the words to answer Elide, closing her eyes, and covering herself again with a bright blush. In the end, the emperor sat on the bed, buttoned his shirt, and explained to Liana that he would feel uncomfortable if he decided to stay close. The Empress immediately became sad, realizing that he felt uncomfortable being near her, dreaming of being with Elide a little longer. The boy turned around and said that he had already heard Liana ask the head maid if she had anything to do in the palace. And Lid covered the lady's hand with his own and explained that she didn't have to work, because before she had only been doing something similar all her life, but now she shouldn't try too hard. The emperor asked her to simply be here and do nothing else. The Empress's heart began to beat faster as she slowly realized His Majesty's words. Ilid promised to call the tailors and offer Liana a dress or jewelry, but the lady immediately shook her head. The emperor looked at the girl irritably, believing that she didn't want to take what he himself was giving her. Liana flinched at such a sudden change in His Majesty, looking at him silently, and with fear in her eyes. She tried to explain something to him, denying his words, but Ilid interrupted her, demanding that she simply accept it, because this time she wouldn't have to sell them due to lack of money. Getting out of bed, The emperor also added that if Liana wanted anything, she would have to tell him. Finally, the bedroom door slammed shut, and the empress was completely alone. Alone with her thoughts, Liana boldly realized that she sincerely wanted to always be with Ilith. At the same time, the girl believed that His Highness did not share this desire with her at all. Physical closeness and Theodore's presence were enough for him. Liana easily compared it to how the empress should just be an empty shell. Finally, the girl could realize that eternal love, two halves of a whole. And all these loud legends about Manish and Ariadne turned out to be a complete lie. Even though the empress had always been an exceptional realist, she believed in all these fairy tales. Hot tears appeared in Liana's eyes, and her lips puckered with resentment, and the awareness of how ridiculous everything had turned out to be. At that moment, the emperor himself was sitting quietly in his office, completely absorbed in his work. The assistant examined Eyelid and immediately realized that he was in a good mood, judging by the fact that there were no problems controlling his abilities. The boy heard that His Majesty managed to visit the Empress's chambers and, apparently, he was still able to calm down with her. The assistant knew that this was his chance and hoped that His Majesty would treat all problems with understanding. So he quietly approached him and called him. The guy carefully handed the paper to Ilid and explained that it was a document related to next week's night's parade. His Majesty, without further ado, put his seal on the document, and his assistant was mentally pleased that everything went well right away. After which he handed over the next papers, saying that this was already about the awards ceremony, which will also take place next week. Suddenly, Ilid interrupted him, asking for the first time about the name of his new assistant. The boy said he had already introduced himself before this moment, and that his name was Xavier Parker. The emperor thought he was Viscount Parker's second son, but his interlocutor immediately corrected him, explaining to him that he was the first son. His Majesty recalled that Viscount Parker was once involved in the textile business, after which he demanded that his assistant take care of the highest quality silk for the empress and call the merchants who sold the best jewelry. The emperor returned the signed papers to Xavier, adding that the money should not be used from the empress's treasury, but from his personal one. Parker suddenly remembered that His Majesty was looking for a book and asked what exactly interested him. The emperor got up from the table and announced that he himself would go to the library for a short walk and relax. As Parker followed Ilid, he accidentally dropped one of the papers while turning around to pick it up. Quickly glancing at the document's content, the man noticed that the Empress's name was crossed out from the list of guests for the night's parade. At the same time, the butler suggested that Liana wear a necklace that, in his opinion, would truly suit her face perfectly. After which, the maid Brenda suggested another jewel that could also highlight the Empress's features. The girl herself sat, leaning over, and answered all questions only with cold silence, without even looking in the direction of the jewelry. Finally, the Empress slowly began to speak, asking for all the jewelry to be removed, since she didn't want to wear them. And sitting in her room, the girl exhaled heavily, realizing that she couldn't choose anything. They are too luxurious, and at the same time uncomfortable, which will only annoy Liana more. So she couldn't choose anything from what they offered. The Empress again thought about Ilid and realized that she didn't understand his feelings, nor even his mood. Liana still starts to hope for something and get disappointed, to give up, but again tries to flutter, not being completely different from the person who is so unrequitedly in love with the prince. The girl still couldn't understand why she was in that place, because even despite the expensive dresses she wore, Theodore was still just an ordinary maid. The Empress tightly hugged her knees, burying her face in them and realizing the stupid mistakes she was making, wondering how to deal with the feeling of loneliness. The girl truly missed those same people who never felt burdened by Liana's presence. Liana remembered one of the maids, wondering how her always cheerful Deborah was after everything that happened. And then Annie also appeared in the Empress's memory, because the girl couldn't even know if she had finally found a decent job. Liana remembered every one of those with whom she spent her working and non-working time. sincerely interested in how the workers of the Kato estate were doing. The Empress recalled with what haste she was able to send them a small letter, from which she truly hoped to receive a reply. With bitter tears in her eyes, the girl tried to guess if anyone missed her. That old Liana Theodore. Suddenly, the Empress's thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the door, calling the lady who was in the room. The maid entered with a bright smile, announcing that a guest had arrived for Liana, which only surprised her greatly. The girl immediately said, looking away, that if it was about merchants, then they should be told to leave, because Theodore didn't want anything at all. But suddenly, behind the maid's skirt, a small figure with a soft pink bow on her head appeared. Seeing her, the Empress's face instantly lit up, and with a joyful smile she recognized her beloved niece. Little Phoebe stood in front of Liana in a pale pink dress like a bow, rejoicing to see her aunt. The girls quickly hugged each other, rejoicing at such a long-awaited meeting. Phoebe confessed to her aunt how much she had missed her during all this time. The Empress explained that her niece would no longer need to go far, because from that day on they would live together in the palace. Liana said that although the rooms are different, the buildings are located nearby. And if Phoebe gets bored, she can come to her at any time. The girl happily talked about how they could do all sorts of different things together. Liana confirmed with a smile that all this was possible, while realizing how lonely her niece felt without her. Phoebe said she managed to do many interesting things on the estate. She visited the library, the greenhouse, and looked at everything. And then the Empress listened as the girl talked about how she would be sent to study at the best school in the empire, where very smart children went. Liana asked again, realizing that her niece might be referring to the Empire Academy. Phoebe confirmed that it wasn't a school, but an academy, and said she had already passed the entrance exams, which turned out to be not at all difficult. The Empress immediately hugged the baby, rejoicing at how smart she was, and what a great future she could have. The girl began to wonder if everything was really so good there, hearing in response that it was a great place. Liana said that only very smart people study there, all talented people, regardless of the empire or kingdom, enter the academy. She knew that once she went there, Phoebe could study whatever she wanted, and there would be many of the most interesting books for her. The most important thing is that her options will expand in the future. She will have the opportunity to choose, which would never have been possible for a commoner. She won't have to starve like before, and there will no longer be a need to pick up other people's discarded books. Phoebe will finally be happy. The girls hugged again, and Liana could realize that by becoming Empress, she could make her beloved niece happy. At night, His Majesty handed Theodore a small book and told her it would be easier to read and teach etiquette. And Lid said that it is a collection of real-life cases, the example of which will clarify everything. And his writing style is quite simple. The Empress listened attentively to her interlocutor, bringing the book closer to herself, and wondering with excitement if His Majesty cared so much about her. After which Liana smiled joyfully, sincerely thanking Elide for so much help. After thinking for a while, the Emperor became embarrassed, cleared his throat, and explained that the girl shouldn't thank him so much for everything. Turning away and wanting to leave, the boy heard the words that he was taking care of the lady. He brought a book and even took Phoebe to the academy. Elid explained that Theodore is now the Empress, and this is obvious, but the lady still insisted that he even waste time on her. As in the example of the academy, His Majesty immediately addressed his interlocutor and told him that his niece had passed the exams herself and, if she had failed, not even the Emperor could have helped in any way. Liana agreed and realized that her niece was truly a smart girl who resembled her aunt. The girl realized that as soon as Phoebe arrived, the storm that had been raging inside the Empress, all that time immediately subsided. Indeed, if Liana had remained that ordinary maid, she would have been somewhat happy with her simple life. But then the girl definitely wouldn't have been able to provide a good and bright future for her beloved niece. The Empress believed that everything would be fine, even if she didn't have that harmonious family she dreamed of, nor the simple joys of married life. Even if Liana's pride is hurt, because her unrequited love was finally rejected. She realizes that she can give up everything. The Empress spoke with a smile about how happy Phoebe was when she arrived at the palace, and talked about entering the academy. His Majesty could only remain still upon hearing that. In fact, Liana was sincerely grateful to him for everything he had done. The Emperor closed one of the books with a loud bang, believing that the girl was right, because Phoebe really resembled her. Elith told her that, according to the nanny he assigned, Liana's niece gathered a whole mountain of books there, behind which she was not always visible. The Empress laughed and admitted that she also had a lot to study, so a single small book wouldn't be enough for that. Looking at the traces of her studies that Liana hadn't had time to clear away, she hoped that His Majesty wouldn't think she was making a mess everywhere. The girl quickly approached the table near which the Emperor was standing, and with embarrassment carefully began putting the books away and accessories from their place, and Lid stood behind her interlocutor, examining her and the traces of their wedding night on her neat wrists. His Majesty remarked aloud that Liana's bruise had almost disappeared, and said that he regularly used an ointment for this. The girl said that she drank special tea for swelling and ate healthy food. And the maids who helped her with the bath said that outwardly everything was much better than before. The Emperor laughed, saying it was a pity he couldn't check this personally. To which Liana began to convince him that she wasn't lying, and that there was no need to check her body. The girl gradually blushed upon hearing that this time Ilid would settle for just a simple kiss on the lips, asking again if that was exactly how it was. Gently touching the Empress's hair and turning it, the boy said he wasn't sure that everything was really like that. And Lid smiled mischievously and continued saying that, in fact, everything will now happen only depending on Liana's behavior. Covering herself with the same blush as her interlocutor, the Emperor slowly began to lean towards the girl's face. Liana placed her hand on His Majesty's shoulder, pressing closer and closer against the opposite body, and merging with him in a gentle kiss. The next day, little Phoebe was by the window, watching the servants in the territory of the imperial palace, who had been coming and going all morning. She turned to her aunt, wondering what everyone was so busy with, and heard that a luxurious banquet would be held tonight for which everyone was preparing with such diligence. Liana said that this event will be the first since the Emperor's coronation, so it is extremely important for everyone. And then, with a bright smile, she invited her niece to read several books on etiquette together. Liana said that the door to the Empress's bedroom is not closed even at night, because she could be attacked at any moment, so the way to retreat must always be open. The girl realized with a smile that it was thanks to His Majesty that she and Phoebe now had so many books to read, which made her niece happy. The Empress, embarrassed, snatched the book from the baby when she started reading about the convenience of the fifth Manish's idea, who proposed that in the imperial palace, the husband's rooms be connected by a single door. Liana quickly distracted her niece, inviting her to have more chocolate cookies and almonds, to which Phoebe immediately agreed. The Empress exhaled deeply, realizing how dangerous it was and promising herself to read about the construction plan of the imperial palace a little later. Suddenly, Phoebe wondered if she would be able to use the Idle language if she went to the academy. The girl sadly recalled that her aunt told her not to speak this language in front of Lady Angelica, which meant she shouldn't speak it in front of aristocrats. The Empress realized that perhaps, because she had to kneel before the nobility, Phoebe was still worried about that very incident. Liana carefully wiped the crumbs from her niece's face with her finger, promising her that from now on this would not happen again. After which she hugged the baby tightly, telling her with a smile and tranquility that now she can do whatever she wants. Late at night, the Empress was in her chambers, looking at something in the window, and wondering if everything was fine with Phoebe. Then it seemed to Liana that she had actually made the right decision, because as soon as she reached her niece, the girl's pride no longer mattered. However, she didn't even think about Phoebe's feelings at that moment. She didn't think about how it was for her to look at her aunt's hunched back like that. The Empress supposed that this could hurt the baby, and she should take into account how she would feel. Liana turned her head towards the door, wondering if she should talk to her niece to find out more. The girl realized that on the day of the banquet, His Majesty was unlikely to want to come see her unexpectedly at night, and besides, she had nothing special to do. The Empress thought about sleeping with Phoebe that night, sincerely hoping that this would not create any problems for either of them. Pulling the doorknob, Liana looked at it puzzled, not understanding why it was locked. Suddenly, the door opened, and the head cleaning lady appeared, who was interested in knowing if the girl needed anything. Because by just ringing the bell, she would answer immediately. With some fear, the Empress stepped back and asked why the door to her room was locked. The maid said that, for the safety of the imperial family, they decided to lock the doors of their private rooms. Then, clumsily, she explained that this rule had been added recently and therefore, it was not surprising that Liana had not heard about it yet. Being left alone again, the girl did not say a word, remaining in the same spot. Not understanding what this stupid excuse was, Liana knew that it was unlikely that someone would suddenly add such a rule, making changes to centuries-old traditions. The girl remembered the head maid and realized how excited she seemed when she opened the door to the Empress. Then, also remembering the door, which could very easily open outwards. But it doesn't open at all from the inside, of which everything immediately became clear without further ado. Liana, exhausted and completely desperate, sat on the floor in the middle of her personal room, realizing that she was simply locked in this room. His Majesty himself ordered the girl locked up so that she wouldn't even think about showing up at the banquet. Liana found it very difficult to accept all this bitter truth, realizing more and more that it was all due to the fact that she was a low-born empress. The emperor, completely downcast, walked down the corridor, wanting to finally take a break from such a noisy banquet and relax at least a little. And Lid sighed heavily, closed his eyes, and realized that almost everyone present were just the dirty aristocrats of his capital. Thanks to Ariadne, His Majesty can safely control his condition, however. He is still quite different from other people. Absolutely, the five senses are intensified in a completely different way than those of a common person. And ordinary. And all these people surrounding him are simply stupid and incompetent. And their intentions are terribly repugnant. The emperor remembered Zuliana, realizing how tired he was of everything around him, and how much he needed that very peace. And Lid remembered the maid's words that the girl wanted to leave her room, but she was immediately prevented from doing so. His Majesty was already reaching his hand towards the door, realizing how difficult it sometimes is to understand Liana, because sometimes the boy thinks she doesn't need him at all. Finally, the door opened carefully, and a wide bed appeared before the emperor. And seated on it was the lady, whom he desired so much to have. It seemed to Elide that during all that time, the empress wanted to abandon him and flee as far as possible from the imperial palace. The emperor went further into the room, sitting on the bed next to the girl, without disturbing the silence of the bedroom. Elith felt ashamed thinking that Liana actually didn't want to flee anywhere, because Phoebe is here now, and it is unlikely the lady can leave her. The emperor examined the girl's back, still not understanding this strange silence on her part. Suddenly, His Majesty's fingers bumped into something lying on the bed, which made him interrupt his thoughts. The emperor looked toward the side where he was groping for a certain object, examining it, and slowly understanding something by himself. After this, Elid decided to ask if Liana really wanted to go to the banquet that would be held in the imperial palace. The empress didn't even move, still looking somewhere in front of her, and answered that she could not afford such a thing. Elith frowned, perfectly aware of how his interlocutor's voice trembled, and realizing that she truly wanted to be present. His Majesty couldn't understand why she was so eager to go to an event that was simply infested with these venomous snakes with their sharp tongues. The emperor touched the girl's body, already wanting to say something to her, but suddenly Liana shook herself abruptly, moving away from her interlocutor. His Majesty's hands trembled with emotion, and without understanding why the empress suddenly began to avoid him so clearly. The man himself placed the same trembling hands on his knees, admitting that, Apparently, he had not yet fully recovered. And Lid said that after a state of madness, this is not so easy to do, and that he probably should replenish his divine power more often. As Liana herself told him. Finally, the girl turned to her interlocutor, apologizing for not having thought about it while approaching him. And Lid placed his hand on His Majesty's face and realized that he should meet him halfway like this. Even if he didn't want to, because she was his empress. Partially selfishly, the emperor thought that as long as Liana gave his soul that long-awaited peace, she could never leave him. Looking directly into the girl's eyes, His Majesty asked her not to think nonsense. After all, at the banquet, there was absolutely no one with whom an interesting conversation could be held. Placing his hand around the empress's nape, Ilid pulled her closer to him, mentally asking her to always be alone with him. And now the girl was sitting in the imperial garden, thinking deeply and recalling all the words His Majesty uttered that night. But suddenly, the niece pulled her aunt out of her thoughts and memories, cheerfully telling her how nice the weather was. The empress raised her head, looked around, and after a brief silence, agreed with the baby's opinion. Phoebe picked up the shopping basket and, looking away, began to talk about how wonderful it would be to have a picnic on such a beautiful day. And then she put the basket on the table, asking Liana if she needed to work for now, suggesting they go to the library together. The empress smiled, realizing that, indeed, it had been a long time since they had a picnic. The girl realized that it would be nice to have a little distraction and invited Phoebe to have some treats. And finally start having fun. After these words, a bright smile of joy immediately appeared on the baby's face. On the way, the head cleaning lady stopped the girls and asked if they were going to the library. The maid asked them to wait a little, saying it was necessary to notify the library workers about the visit of imperial family members. The empress immediately frowned, irritated to realize that the woman in front of them was blatantly lying to her. Liana all the time felt a secret disdainful attitude from her towards her, and the elder maid's attempts to take control of the girl. And it would be fine if the empress were alone, but apparently not this time. Liana said that in the books on manners and etiquette it was written that a member of the imperial family could visit the library at any convenient time for her. The girl wondered if her title had not yet been confirmed, since only aristocrats should request a visit. The head cleaning lady clumsily said that probably some kind of misunderstanding caused this to happen. Liana said that His Majesty brought her the latest edition of the imperial book on palace rules. But it was unclear why the servant's statements differed from those written in the books. The empress asked the elder maid her opinion on whether she thought this was already some kind of anarchy. The woman could not find the right words to answer His Majesty, so she remained awkwardly silent. Finally, the girls lay down on a blanket, relaxed, enjoying nature, and read a variety of books. Liana asked her niece with some severity to try to eat more carefully, because they were still in a crowded place. And then Phoebe handed a gift to the girl and offered to try something so delicious that the empress immediately agreed. Liana was happy that everything finally worked out, and she was very lucky to know it by observing the behavior of her lady Natasha. But suddenly, the lady began to think if the aristocrat was going through this kind of trouble. The empress's freedom was limited, and Liana's assumptions were confirmed by the fact that the doors to her private room were not only locked that day of the banquet. The empress pulled the handle several times, but absolutely nothing happened, and full uniformed knights were outside the doors. And that expression on the face of the head maid, when she suddenly hesitated, was as strange as everything else. Liana managed to realize that, in fact, the emperor wanted to keep her locked up in the imperial palace. And the girl understood why he could do this, because for starters, all the emperor's power begins with his servants. And in the imperial palace, where everything must be kept under strict control, they simply cannot allow the empress, who was just a maid before, to wander wherever she pleases. If all this is left unattended, the servants will develop the usual hostility towards the empress. And this can affect the emperor himself. However, even if Liana understands all this, it is no longer so easy to accept. and even more so with the condition that the girl has a person whom she loves and tries to protect with all her might. And suddenly, Phoebe shouted to Liana to look somewhere where her niece was pointing her finger. Looking around, the girl noticed a small bird's nest in one of the tree branches. The Empress also noticed it, wondering what kind of bird could live there. Phoebe suddenly said she hoped it wasn't a cuckoo's nest, which really surprised Liana. Her niece told how the cuckoo throws its chicks into other people's nests, and they simply torture the bird mother of another person. Liana admitted with a smile that she didn't even know about this, realizing for herself how quickly Phoebe was growing up and developing. The Empress hugged the baby, knowing with confidence that she had to be brave for the sake of her beloved niece. And now, during the Emperor's preparations, Liana slowly approached him. The girl called Elide and asked him to find her an etiquette teacher, because it is difficult to learn so much just from books. Liana awkwardly admitted that, while learning table etiquette, she simply doesn't know if she is doing everything correctly. And Lid finally turned to her and listened that with a teacher, the Empress's knowledge would be consolidated much faster, and her training itself would be much more effective. After his speech, Liana stood next to her interlocutor in silence, waiting for at least one word from him and understanding that, apparently, it would be impossible to fulfill it. But unexpectedly, the Emperor only asked why the girls needed this, and what she wanted to achieve with it. His Majesty remembered his beloved niece and admitted that he didn't want to be embarrassed by something in front of other people. And although it is almost impossible, the day will come when the Empress can participate in the banquet. Liana would like to be proud next to the Emperor, without being ashamed of herself. With Elid's permission, the girl would like to become a real Empress of his kingdom. She cannot change her origins, but she can learn to behave well in the company of aristocrats. The Emperor thought for a moment, remembering the expression on His Majesty's face. Elid noticed that same look of his, in which a desperate thirst was clearly visible. The Emperor admitted that he absolutely did not expect the girl to ask him for such a thing. His Majesty approached his interlocutor and explained that it was the first time she had asked him for anything, which surprised Liana. But after a couple of moments, a smile shone on her face, knowing that Elid would soon find her a suitable teacher. Liana smiled all around, sincerely thanking the Emperor for agreeing to help her this way. His Majesty smiled back and explained that she should thank him for every trifle. But the girl clumsily thanked him again. Covering the Emperor's palms with hers, Liana promised him that she would definitely try when realizing that, for the first time, she had a chance to do something. The Empress will finally become the person of whom neither Phoebe nor Elid himself will be ashamed. At the same time, she informed the Emperor that she would try hard not to get in his way. For herself, the girl realized that if she succeeded, His Majesty would finally recognize Liana as his Empress. And so the Emperor stood in the corridor, immersed in his thoughts. He recalled Liana's words, that she did not want Elid to feel so uncomfortable with her. And then her promise to do everything possible not to become His Majesty's weak spot. The Emperor looked at the tall picture and realized the sweet and gentle words Liana spoke. However, Ilid believed that they did not come from the Empress's heart. It was dishonest on His Majesty's part that Liana deceived people with such tender speeches. In reality, Ilid perfectly understood that a person only becomes stronger when they simply need to protect someone else. Therefore, the Emperor knew that Liana could tell him whatever she wanted, and he would sincerely believe that she was doing it all for his own good. But that's fine, because it will be even better for Elid himself, because he will no longer be able to push her away from him. As long as the Emperor can give the girl what she really wants, she certainly won't be able to leave him. And leave him alone. Therefore, everything will be fine, because if Liana wants power, he can give it to her. If she wants someone's head, Elid will immediately throw it at the lady's feet. For the Emperor, it ceased to be absolutely important what His Majesty wanted, because he could give her what she wanted. Already in His Majesty's office, Parker said that the documents described a solution to the problem with the budget of the Attila Temple. Without answering, Elid kept looking at the papers, smoking a cigarette, and was more interested in knowing how the tea for the Empress was. The Emperor's assistant immediately said that the girl drank all the tea and did not turn the doorknob either. Parker was embarrassed, but still expressed his opinion, saying that all this was too much, and that perhaps they should lift the restrictions on the Empress. After all, by imprisoning the owner of the Empress's palace, he may deprive her of her influence. The boy was sure that Liana one way or another, but realizes something. At least when Ilid himself talks about it so openly. But finally he felt the flame on the top of his head. The Emperor's assistant shouted in fear. His Majesty asked not to complain, because this little light could not kill him. After which Ilid asked Parker to recommend an excellent etiquette teacher for the new Empress. The boy cheerfully said that, in addition to etiquette, the girl would need to receive education. And he had already prepared a complete list for it. The Emperor's assistant has selected the most capable people from his empire. And Ilid only has to choose one of them. After thinking for a while, His Majesty pointed his finger at the profile of one of the ladies. And Parker immediately noticed the apt choice he had made, pointing to the Countess of Somerset. And then the Emperor's assistant said again that he had something else, and sighing heavily. And Lid asked him what he meant. The guy placed a letter on the edge of the table, right in front of His Majesty, explaining that it had recently arrived from the previous emperor. It was written inside that Lennox, who had been crown prince for a long time, suddenly abandoned the throne and quietly left the capital. However, there are still many nobles on his side, and they threaten the power of the current emperor. Suddenly, Ilith looked up, saw Parker's interest, and wondered if he was curious. But he immediately heard an awkward negative answer. But the emperor asked not to invent things, explaining that the essence of the letter was not to trust Ariadne. The gods long ago cursed Manish, who threatened his influence and said that he needed to receive Ariadne's love for the blessing to return. But the aroma then gave way to foul rot, every touch left a scar on the body. And the blessing gave way to a curse. And only Ariadne could save him from this terrible and endless torment. Manish once told the girl that she was a goddess to him and asked her to always be with him. However, she only laughed in his face and asked why she should do this. And at that moment, Manish finally realized that his existence is impossible without Ariadne. But she is capable of replacing him with anyone. The boy began to go crazy, realizing that he would never be the one for her. In the end, Manish began to hug Ariadne so that she could not run away, leave him, or disappear so that she definitely could not die. However, this girl was the same person created by the gods themselves. Ariadne never gave up in her attempts to regain that long-awaited freedom that was so abruptly snatched away from her. But only for the first time did the girl commit suicide in front of Manish. The boy lost Ariadne, and with her at the same time, he lost all his divine powers. Consequently, his entire kingdom was completely wiped off the face of the earth after this. Finally, the emperor came out of his thoughts and, looking at the blue light in his hand, he ordered only to strengthen security and inform him if the doorknob turned at night. Parker restrained himself and awkwardly reported that he perfectly understood His Majesty. Finally, Caroline Somerset arrived at the imperial palace, who reported that it was an honor for her, and how happy she would be to be able to teach etiquette to the Empress and Lady Phoebe. Liana asked to take care of them, and the teacher immediately got down to business, wondering if she understood correctly that the ladies needed accelerated training. The Empress said that her niece would go to the academy in the fall, and that her debut in high society was about to happen. Caroline clapped, inviting the girls not to waste precious time and move on to training as soon as possible. During their first lesson, Countess Somerset told and showed them everything only in theory, explaining the most difficult aspects of etiquette. Already in the 7th lesson, the girls tried and practiced to correctly hold cutlery and behave decently at the table, as befits secular girls. Things didn't get easier in the 20th lesson. The ladies still worked hard, completing various tasks from Countess Somerset. And finally, after the last lesson this month, the Empress simply reached her limit, realizing that she had completely run out of strength. But at the same time, Liana knew that nothing could be done because she knew little and therefore, she needed to try even harder to keep up. The girl still needs to make her debut this season and also find a reliable tutor for Phoebe so that she can safely go to the best academy. And then she realized that she shouldn't bother His Majesty with her presence or her desires. Clinging to the last bit of strength she had left, Liana only realized that she would do the best she could and try even harder. And in the end, the Empress fell asleep on the same small sofa, on which she only leaned for a while to rest. And to think, Liana woke up to the sound of books being folded, not understanding what was happening in the room. But suddenly, the girl noticed the Emperor in front of her, who was interested in her well-being. Picking up books scattered on the floor, the Empress shouted in confusion when His Majesty managed to come, as Liana had only closed her eyes for a minute to relax a little. The girl asked Ilid for forgiveness. She looked to the side and realized how uncomfortable she was with this whole situation. The Empress explained that they would soon have a writing test. That's why she fell asleep, because they have similar tests every other day. His Majesty sighed heavily because he hadn't hired a teacher so that the girl would not fall asleep from exhaustion. But Liana only wanted to work harder, apologizing to him again. And Lid explained that if this continues, he will order the number of lessons to be reduced, because he doesn't want the Empress to fall asleep like a sick hen. The girl admitted that she hopes to finish her studies in a week, but if that stress affects her health, she will ask to reduce the number of lessons. Elide squeezed the Empress's palm, stroked it, and told her she should rest. And he himself would explain everything to Phoebe and Lady Somerset. The Emperor lifted Liana's hands, and she immediately remembered the ink on her wrist. The girl already shouted, about to say something, but His Majesty ordered her to sit down quietly, while he himself did everything for her. Liana suddenly started claiming she wasn't tired from studying at all, to which Elith noticed the dark circles under her eyes, confirming the complete opposite. Having heard from the Empress that it was all ink, His Majesty decided to try to erase it. But suddenly, an awkward pause appeared between them again, and their faces moved closer and closer to each other. And finally, their lips touched, gradually merging into the tenderest kiss. Suddenly, the Empress felt the laces of her corset slowly starting to loosen under the skillful fingers of the kingdom's emperor. Suddenly, the girl began to say that Lady Somerset had given her a book. And His Majesty immediately became interested in what that very book talked about. Liana began to timidly explain what it said, that before the ritual, she had to learn the essence of respect and honor. And at the same time, she should help her partner take off his clothes, gently touching the Emperor's shirt. But unexpectedly, His Majesty grabbed the girl's hand and cunningly said that he wasn't sure if this was true. The Emperor moved closer and closer to Liana, admitting that apparently they had already started off on the wrong foot. Feeling the hem of her dress being lifted, the Empress asked to stop and offered to move to a wider and more comfortable bed for both of them. And comfortable. Without answering anything, Elith threw the girl onto his back, telling how many say that in case of contact, Ariadne still feels the flow of sacred energy. The Emperor smiled, wondering what that sensation was like according to Liana herself. The girl looked away and said embarrassedly that, for her, it felt like some kind of flow of water, which immediately surprised Elith. Liana began to explain in more detail that it was like warm water pouring into her body, and she felt a bright flow of energy in the places of contact. The boy decided to ask a clarifying question about whether she had absorbed the Empress's powers, but he immediately heard a negative answer. For the Emperor, that answer turned out to be strange, because Liana constantly falls asleep. Embarrassedly, the girl immediately began to explain intermittently that in one way or another, but anyone falls asleep from fatigue. The Emperor simply assumed that Liana was simply not resilient enough. But it turned out that this was not the case at all, because as a maid she worked a lot. And then the entire face of the Empress was covered with a bright blush from the words that she simply didn't know how to behave. The boy was able to understand and hear the confirmation that the fact that Liana helps him calm down is not a problem at all. After saying how good it is, he suddenly took the Empress in his arms. The girl shouted in surprise, and Ilid explained to her that she herself had recently said that it would be better if they lay down on the bed first. Although the Emperor himself thought it would be good to do it right here. But when asked if it was worth leaving Liana, she just moved closer and asked to move to a wider and more comfortable bed for both of them. After which, the Emperor tenderly kissed the girl on the forehead without uttering a single word. His Majesty calmly carried the Empress to another room where they could settle in much more comfortably. Finally, the last test arrived, which related exclusively to table etiquette, and it required attention to the slightest detail. After following every action of the Empress, Countess Somerset, with a sincere smile, reported that the girl had successfully passed everything, but then told the cheerful Liana that even if she achieved success, she should better control her own tone of speech. Caroline believed that the Empress would have difficulties, but she turned out to be wrong. Despite the fact that it is quite difficult to conquer table etiquette in such a short time. Liana sincerely thanked the teacher and said that, as a maid, she often prepared meals, and she believed that this experience was useful to her. Countess of Somerset believed that the Empress would also benefit from real-life experience, and she would offer to invite someone to dinner together. Upon hearing the idea of inviting the Emperor, Liana hesitated greatly, because at normal times he is very busy and cannot be distracted. The Countess convinced the girl that His Majesty could definitely find free time for his wife. Finally, the Empress firmly decided to invite Ilith to dinner, realizing that she still needed to practice at least a little more. The Empress got lost in her thoughts again, happily practicing on her own to improve her table etiquette skills. Countess Somerset, standing behind Liana, looked at her with disdain, also thinking about something. One of the servants was in a hurry to deliver a letter from the lady to Elide, in which she explained that she was afraid to distract him with her visit, and therefore delivered the letter. Liana recounted how the teacher told her that she had finally passed the table etiquette test, and also recommended that she gain experience by participating in meals. The girl invited Elide to dinner with her during the week, if he suddenly had free time for her. Liana wrote that she could calmly accept a refusal if he was busy. But the Emperor was already leaving the office, followed by his oblivious assistant. A bright blush appeared on His Majesty's face at such an unexpected proposal, to which he immediately answered the maids. Liana was immediately told that the Emperor agreed, which made a bright smile appear on her face. After which, the maid added that His Majesty informed her that he would come to dinner at the Empress's palace. And suddenly, Liana realized that there were less than 2 hours left until dinner, and gradually began to panic about not knowing what to do in such a situation. The maid heard the flow of words from the Empress, who was so worried about her appearance for that evening. Laughing quietly at how scared Liana was, the maid promised to call someone who was well versed in these things and could help her. And now the Emperor was already sitting at the table, waiting for Liana to arrive and thinking about something of his own. Finally, the girl herself entered the room, looking at the floor with a modest smile. But only when she looked up, she was sincerely surprised that the Emperor had arrived much earlier than her, and was already sitting waiting for the long-awaited dinner. His Majesty didn't understand why she was speaking so seriously if it was just a dinner, and Liana looked as if she was preparing for a fight. The Emperor explained that he wouldn't eat the girl, so she shouldn't worry so much, and suggested it would be better to start dinner. The lady felt that the beginning was not very good, but immediately tried to calm down. Believing that she could cope, choosing the right cutlery, the Empress remembered how long and hard she studied precisely for this moment when she could prove herself. And Lid silently watched how the girl hesitated, trying to choose the right device. Suddenly, the Emperor began to take an interest in how Phoebe was preparing. Who plans to start training this fall? Liana recounted with a smile how her niece was carefully studying the basics, and was a little worried about the lack of time. Unexpectedly, the Emperor asked to bring Phoebe to the main palace during the meeting, which immediately interested the girl. Ilith explained that the Academy president was on the list of participants, and that it would be good to introduce him to Phoebe, so the girl thanked her interlocutor again. Looking at the glass with her drink, Liana admitted that she did not expect any help from the Emperor in her direction. His Majesty reminded the girl that she should not thank Ilid so often for all sorts of trifles. The Emperor asked what would happen to the Empress's reputation if she thanked everyone for small things like this. The girl immediately nodded firmly, indicating that she perfectly understood His Majesty, and understanding that he was actually very right. Previously, Liana seemed to have difficulty understanding the Emperor. But now there is a feeling that such problems no longer arise. Gradually, with slow steps, they begin to approach each other, which made the Empress incredibly happy. Because that is exactly what she desired so much. Gradually, their dinner turned into a friendlier conversation, in which there was a variety of topics. And the girl seemed genuinely happy at that moment. And everything really turned out well. But only the end of dinner ruined the Empress's entire mood. His Majesty unexpectedly invited Liana to choose her own table etiquette teacher. After a brief silence, the Empress asked again, not realizing what the interlocutor meant by these strange words. The girl was very surprised by the words that Caroline Somerset turned out to be quite incompetent and, therefore, His Majesty simply dismissed her. The Emperor explained to Lena that the entire dinner together was in itself the worst mistake he could have made. And the very idea of hiring Lady Somerset was a mistake from the beginning, when he was only looking at the profiles of the teachers. And Lyd believed that it was worth postponing the Empress's debut, because if she behaved like that at meals, she could never achieve what she wanted. The girl got up from her seat, apologizing and explaining that she would prefer to return to the room first. While walking around the table, Liana apologized once again for her rudeness. And so much self-confidence. The Empress trembled, not understanding at all what she had done wrong, and at what point everything went wrong as it should have. Unexpectedly, His Majesty said that Lady Somerset would be punished with the greatest severity possible for her offense. After this, the Empress was surprised and shocked by the words about the severe punishment of her former teacher. His Majesty explained that his wife's reputation directly affects his own image, and that he cannot stand aside when someone dares to invade Liana's reputation. The Emperor looked at the girl next to him and bravely declared that Lady Somerset's punishment was completely justified. Putting her hand to her chest, Liana immediately explained that the teacher had done nothing wrong, and that she herself was the stupid one. The girl asked to be punished if the Emperor was angry about this whole situation. Liana realized that even if she perfected her etiquette knowledge perfectly, His Majesty would always be dissatisfied with her one way or another, because she could not hide her origins with her behavior. She could no longer hold back tears, and said that Lady Somerset's crime could not be avoided, since the Empress who studied with her comes from the simplest people. And Lyd could not understand why the girl said those words, but that was her sincere opinion. The Empress tightly clutched her dress and promised that she would try to prevent a similar situation from happening again. With her hand on her chest, the girl made a deep bow, thanking His Majesty for the meal. Then she quickly turned around, leaving as quickly as possible and leaving the Emperor alone with his servants. The people present looked at each other with great concern, saying nothing and not understanding what to do. Suddenly, the Emperor and everyone ordered to leave and not dare to enter again, regardless of the sounds they heard from inside. The whole crowd of servants and maids instantly rushed to the exit, just not to be alone for a second longer with His Majesty, who was angry. Finally alone with himself, Ilith felt how his strength was no longer restrained inside. And gradually it was coming out. A powerful blow of divine power and a part of the wall like never before, while the Emperor himself remained seated in place without even flinching. His Majesty did not restrain himself as his powers swirled the room around him, creating more and more blue flames. Elide knew very well that Caroline Somerset was involved in what happened, because Liana would never have done something like that of her own free will. But still, the Emperor couldn't believe how stupidly Liana acted in this situation. The way the girl used cutlery, absolutely every move she made was terribly wrong. He thought that the Empress might have difficulty manipulating the dishes, and that one or two mistakes could be attributed to her inexperience. However, the way the girl held the utensils in her hands, the order of the dishes she consumed, and even the way she held the glass, every one of her actions was the opposite of etiquette. And Lid remembered how his Empress worked day and night, even passing all the tests. Which meant it wasn't her fault. Caroline Somerset did all this on purpose, simply wanting to disgrace Lena. There was no way she could show the lady her true emotions, because she spoke to her very calmly. So as not to hurt the Empress, Eli decided not to simply explain the real reason for this decision. But the Empress immediately thought that it was only her fault, and that it was because of her that everything had failed. Ilid was thinking about how he could kill that pathetic countess, who so boldly decided to insult his Empress. The Emperor managed to promise himself that he would destroy her in every possible way. Because he entrusted Caroline with Liana's training, and she did this to him. Ilid believed that the girl didn't believe him, she only acted in favor of power and therefore tolerated it. But if this continues, Liana will never trust the Emperor and eventually will simply run away from him. Tired, only Ilid firmly decided that he would not allow such a thing. He would never allow his Empress to escape from him anywhere. His Majesty will tightly hold Liana and even force her to stay by his side, no matter the cost. At the same time, the Empress's personal maid was on her knees begging the lady to eat at least a little oatmeal, which would be quite easy to eat. Liana insistently asked to leave the dish aside, and she would definitely eat it a little later. But for now, she didn't feel well. The Empress knew that the maid in front of her could be punished if she didn't take good care of the lady. But the girl herself promised to take care of the consequences. And then she asked to be left alone for a while at least, covering her tired face and exhausted with her hands. After a brief silence, the maid sadly agreed to leave the Empress alone. Finally alone, Liana, exhausted, lies slightly on her side and realizes how tired she actually is. The girl didn't understand why she felt so much pain now. If she studied hard and collected all the possible information provided to her. The lady studied every book, rechecked every test she completed, and Lady Somerset did not point out any errors at all. The lady already felt that His Majesty was simply against her existence. And that was the reason. But suddenly, Liana realized that she should not have used a dessert fork during dinner. And if he thinks so, then His Majesty did not use the same instrument she herself used. But it cannot be that Ilid did not know the etiquette that was taught to him since birth. Liana began to realize that she had only studied with Lady Somerset because she believed that books from other authors could confuse her. But what if in fact the books Caroline gave her only contained false information? The maids chatted, considering the Empress's usual refusals to eat impudent. And they did not understand how Countess Somerset could tolerate her. All these words angered Tina, because everyone spoke as if they understood something in these matters. The behavior and habits of her Empress are nothing like those of those stupid maids. The girl sadly hoped that everything was fine with Liana, when suddenly one of the maids called her. Tina immediately turned around and heard that the Empress herself was looking for her. Liana invited the maid to the luxuriously set table, eager to try the food together. Tina absolutely could not understand how she could eat with the Empress at the same table. Liana reassured her, explaining that she had no prejudice about it and just wanted to share this meal with someone. The maid remembered that last night His Majesty refused even porridge, and now there are so many different foods on the table. The maid knew very well that even if she did not understand the Empress's intentions, she had no right to refuse her. At the end of the evening, Tina thanked her interlocutor for the incredibly tasty dishes. And Liana was glad that she liked everything. The maid gave a polite bow to the Empress, and the girls said goodbye. But as soon as Liana was alone, the smile disappeared from her face, and she began to think about the food. Theodore knew very well that the maids of the imperial palace served the most powerful family in their empire, and they had to learn etiquette in order to enter the palace. The girl noticed that Tina acted the same way as the emperor during the last meal, which only meant that Countess Somerset had fooled her. Liana realized that many would not take her seriously as an empress, because even common maids and currents treated her with contempt. But she couldn't even imagine that Lady Somerset was so insidious. She couldn't directly mock Theodore and therefore she came from the other side. The woman spent a whole month first getting close to the empress and then deceiving her. Liana exhaled deeply and realized that she had underestimated the cunning of the aristocracy. The girl realized that nothing could be done, but she was not going to stand idly by either. As a maid, Liana immediately learned firsthand about the cruelty of the nobility, about how they treated everyone around them. But now the empress will not stand aside and watch this. The girl can no longer hide behind His Majesty's back and absolutely does not want to live in the shadows, ignored by everyone around her. Liana firmly decided that she would deal with this alone because she still had someone to protect. Late at night, the empress called His Majesty to talk and clarify everything. The girl bowed and apologized to Ilith for her rudeness. Liana said she was angry because she didn't understand the intentions of the guy who knew from the beginning that Lady Somerset had taught her incorrectly. The emperor pursed his lips without saying a word because he didn't want the girl to find out everything so as not to bother her with it. His Majesty looked away upon realizing that now they could speak frankly, and immediately announced that he would choose a punishment for Lady Somerset for her act. He invited Liana to independently choose a candidate for a new main teacher with her secretary, because it was he who instructed her to choose a reliable person to teach. The empress admitted that she would not like to change teachers, and moreover, she would like to warn Lady Somerset about what happened. His Majesty scratched the back of his neck, not understanding at all Liana, and all this is because of her. Because it only hurts her. The girl explained that if the maid makes a mistake, she will never repeat it again. Because she learns from her own mistakes, and thanks to this she achieves better results. The emperor said thoughtfully that if a maid makes a mistake, she will immediately hang her head on the wall. But suddenly, Ilith regained consciousness when the girl asked what he meant. The emperor clumsily explained that he would prefer to show everyone what will happen to those who make mistakes. Liana affirmed that she really wanted to study with Countess Somerset, and Ilid did not understand the reasons for this. The girl simply did not want people to suddenly think that she was avoiding Caroline out of fear of her. She knew that if Ilid punished the lady, others would be afraid and would not repeat her offense. But Liana herself would just hide behind him and have no influence. The aristocracy will immediately assume that all the empress can do is complain to her emperor and hide behind him. The boy began to tell her that the lady should not worry about his opinion since Ilid protects her. But unexpectedly, the empress interrupted him with words that she did not want to live like this all the time. His Majesty frowned, believing that Liana did not want to rely on him at all. Recalling his empress, he realized more and more that she always seemed not to need Ilid at all. The emperor decided that it would be as Liana wished, realizing privately that he himself would like the lady to simply surrender to him. And he could give her everything she wanted. But he accepted this only on the condition of appointing a new main maid, and also changing all the maids in the empress's palace. After all, Lady Somerset and her main maid have known each other for a long time, and they definitely don't need unnecessary rumors. After which Ilid realized the state they had brought the empress into by throwing his jacket on her. His Majesty reported that the lady looked like she was about to faint. The girl agreed that Ilid would call a doctor and give her time to rest. Unexpectedly, Liana thanked the emperor for staying with her until the end of the meal. Ilid did not understand how he could leave her and leave the dinner with the empress, who herself called him. The girl knew she couldn't leave because of the people watching them, but she still wanted to thank His Majesty. The emperor reminded the girl that she should learn to speak according to her status. Liana admitted that she had gotten used to thanking people for every little thing. And Lid explained that if she felt uncomfortable, then she should express a different feeling. And it is best to express gratitude in similar tones. Suddenly, a knock was heard at the door, announcing that the doctor had arrived. And he was ready to receive the Empress. His Majesty immediately responded, inviting Liana to leave quickly. But suddenly, somewhat clumsily, the girl called the Emperor and he immediately paid attention to her. Liana admitted that she was really happy that they could talk. After these words, a smile and a slight blush appeared on the boy's face at the same time, with words about how well she was doing. A little later, the Emperor walked down a long corridor with his assistant. Suddenly, Ilid demanded to write an invitation, and Parker started asking who it was for. Upon hearing the name of Caroline Somerset, the Emperor's assistant hesitated. Ilid explained that they didn't need to waste time and go to Somerset's estate. It would be much better for him if this woman came to the imperial palace. The eldest daughter of the County of Somerset heard the story from her mother and admired how interesting it was. Caroline admitted that she did not know what happened after dinner because she no longer gave lessons to the Empress. Betty couldn't even think that Liana was so uncultured because she was taught things contrary to etiquette. And she didn't even notice. Mother believed that the Empress's niece was also an idiot who behaved so stupidly. The girl regretted that a woman with dirty blood became Empress due to some stupid legend. Lady Somerset assumed that the Emperor was really tired of Liana. Ariadne cannot be erased from history, but the Empress has not yet debuted. And all because Elide only needs a shell of her. And the Emperor's favor is received by those who stay by his side. While Liana cannot even count on this. But Betty understood that this girl still occupied the Empress's place. The mother immediately reassured her daughter, telling her that the Emperor still had no concubines. Suddenly, a maid approached them, apologizing for interrupting the conversation. She said that a letter had arrived from the imperial palace and handed it to the ladies. Caroline thought that Brenda did a good job by starting the rumors. After all, the head cleaner immediately promised to send a letter as soon as she got results. The lady suggested that we read and immediately find out everything about how the Empress was being bullied. Betty began to ask her mother about the content, hoping that the Emperor was planning to divorce. The woman immediately said that the letter was not from Brenda at all. And His Majesty invites Lady Somerset to dinner at the imperial palace. Only the closest aristocrats to the Emperor enter the palace banquet hall. This is His Majesty's personal space, and every noble dreams of getting there. And just as the rumors said, this place is absolutely amazing. The Emperor thanked Lady Somerset for accepting his invitation. The Countess replied, saying that she could only shed tears of happiness. And Lid smiled friendly, hoping that the woman liked the food. During the meal, the Emperor became interested in Countess Somerset's bird. Caroline began to cheerfully talk about the bird Marilyn. The Emperor admitted that he could not even imagine that his interlocutor liked birds so much. Elith thought that the lady might be uncomfortable eating poultry, but immediately heard a negative answer. The woman admitted that she loves turkey and pheasant dishes, after which Caroline said that the dishes of the imperial kitchen are truly incredibly tasty. The Emperor realized that Lady Somerset was completely satisfied with the chef's dishes. He asked to understand her correctly and then asked about the name of the bird they were eating. The lady was surprised to hear that it was lovebird meat. Caroline cleared her throat and put her cutlery back in place. She decided to ask again, hoping she had misheard. But completely unabashed, the Emperor repeated the words about the lovebird. Lovebird. And Lid recounted how they caught the bird, dipped it in sauce, and fried it over embers. And then asked, surprised, what the Countess's expression was. The boy suggested that it is all because the interlocutor herself takes care of the lovebird. Not hearing any answer, he asked again why she was behaving this way. After all, this is just a dish that is no different from pheasants and turkeys. The Emperor did not understand what was happening until the woman's body began to tremble. His Majesty stuck the fork into the meat and said that lovebirds, pheasants, and turkeys are birds. Like everyone else in the room, they are the same people. And the Empress, just like Ilid himself, is also a person who feels everything. And this dish is no different from the dishes the Countess ate before. Lady Somerset did not understand at all what was happening, because previously she thought that armor was just decoration. And Lyd asked if Caroline was embarrassed by the fact that he never drank without company. He also said that he does not allow people without a purpose into his space. Suddenly, the Countess drew attention to the flowers in the center of the table. Lady Somerset noticed the feathers of her favorite bird, Marilyn, which was so important to her. She noticed the lady's gaze without understanding how he could roast her bird, for it was not at all because he was mocking the Empress. The Emperor, pleased with himself, only wished his interlocutor bon appetit. After saying that it should be an honor for her to eat with the Emperor himself. His Majesty said that if the dish was no longer to her liking, then there were many others on the table. But Lyd immediately admitted that he believed this was not for one person. Upon learning that the dishes were made from large animals, Lady Somerset remembered her Betty and worried about her. Despite her trembling hands and voice, the Countess said that His Majesty was wrong. The Emperor smiled sweetly and said that it was a relief for him. And Lyd asked the lady to finish her portion so as not to offend the chef, who tried so hard. Soon the Empress was sitting at the same table, and across from her was Lady Somerset, who had come to teach her again. The Countess asked anxiously if Miss Phoebe was late, after which Liana immediately said that the baby graduated from her studies last week. And during her last lesson, Caroline herself told Phoebe to learn things related to someone else's academy. The Countess realized the mistake those words had made, which irritated her even more. The woman still shuddered, recalling the meal with the Emperor. The Countess did not expect at all that His Majesty would choose this woman as his partner. In any case, she considered Lyd's act of threatening over some small thing abnormal. Lady Somerset realized that the incident seemed like a whim of the Emperor himself. His Majesty behaves like a tyrant, completely destroying Brenda's family due to a financial fraud on her part. Caroline didn't even know how much the Empress herself knew about everything. The woman tried to find out why Liana was looking at her again. And what could the smiling Empress really be up to? Suddenly, Ileana asked if the teacher was well and immediately heard a positive response. The Countess justified herself by saying that she was trying to remember where they had stopped. The lady hesitated upon hearing that the Empress wanted to learn table etiquette from the very beginning. The girl asked to check if she was using the equipment correctly. And so, gradually, the Empress began to demonstrate how she managed. In the end, she asked if she had made at least one mistake. The Countess reported that she saw not a single mistake in table etiquette. The Empress said that she asked Tina to help her with her studies. The maid opened her eyes, and Liana had to try very hard to learn all this. And as the Countess will know, imperial servants are quite polite. The Countess found no words to answer, having previously thought that Liana was stupid and naive. It only turned out that the Empress knew everything, but pretended not to know. Liana immediately explained that she doesn't give anyone a second chance. But this time, the Empress decided to forgive Countess Somerset. But only next time, the woman will face the severest punishment, after which Liana smiled tenderly, happy that they understood each other. A little later, the Empress was examining her niece, who was asking her if the uniform suited her well. Liana rejoiced at the beauty before her, thinking that they should call an artist and draw a portrait. After which Phoebe said that in high school she would receive a bow of a different color. The girl noticed with a smile how much her niece liked the academy. Phoebe began to think where she should start when she got there. The little girl said that she wants a real friend so that they don't fight, like they used to during games. But suddenly, the servant interrupted the girls' conversation, asking them to choose a horse for riding lessons. Phoebe asked her aunt to accompany her, but she refused because she already had an appointment. The baby was upset because she wanted to go there with Liana. Promising each other to go together next time, the girls said goodbye. The lady realized that she was afraid Phoebe would feel uncomfortable. But she turned out to be very brave. The Empress realized that for the same reason, she should also try. In fact, Liana did not want to do this and pressured the Countess. But due to Lady Somerset's attitude, the girl no longer had any other choice. Liana's debut was very soon, so she didn't have time to choose a new teacher. The Empress believed she had made the best decision she could. And then Liana walked to the window with the intention of opening it and letting in fresh air. In fact, the Empress only lied to His Highness once. One day, Elide asked a lady how she knew that Lady Somerset had deceived her. Liana said at that moment that, after reading a book about table etiquette from the Countess, she realized that she knew nothing of what was written. The Empress did not want Elide to know that even her maids noticed her flaws. The girl was very afraid that the Emperor would consider Aliana stupid and pathetic. Standing on the balcony and contemplating the beauty of the streets, Theodore realized that summer had already arrived. If she wants to be by His Majesty's side, she will have to face the pressure of the nobility. And she also needs to find a reliable tutor for Phoebe. But nothing ever happens for nothing, and even now there is a huge complexity. The Empress was not sure if she could do it alone before the fall. She could not be sure if she could endure it in such a lonely place without anyone on her side. Suddenly, the voice of a maid was heard behind the doors, calling the Empress. Liana turned around and heard that a new maid had arrived to receive her. The Empress could not believe that time passed so quickly and allowed those who entered to come in. The girl immediately began to say greetings, not yet having had time to see the new maid. But suddenly, Liana stopped saying anything and stood in front of the arriving girl. The Empress realized that Deborah, who was so familiar to her, was standing in front of her. A little earlier, the girl stood in front of the Emperor, who was reading something. She looked at the newcomer and wondered if it was Deborah. The girl bowed briefly, confirming His Majesty's words. To herself, she thought she would go crazy with excitement. Deborah did not understand why she was dragged so abruptly before the Emperor himself, and why he needed her. The girl could not guess why they invited her, but she was firmly sure of one thing. If Deborah makes even one mistake, she will immediately die for it. The Emperor handed the girl a letter written by Liana, inviting her to carefully read its contents. After becoming Empress, the girls stopped communicating, and Deborah thought her friend had cut ties with her low-class friends. The girl realized that His Majesty had never forgotten them. The Emperor explained that she was close to Liana, so he decided to give her a chance. Deborah screamed when she heard that she would now work as a maid in the Empress's palace. After which, he sent the girl to help the Empress in the palace. But finally, he warned that if Deborah was rude to Liana, she would understand that hell was much closer than she could imagine. Subsequently, Deborah and Annie immediately began training and successfully learned the principle of the work of maids in the palace. The girls were given tests on what to do when they meet His Majesty. Deborah did not bow her head to anyone, but she knew that now she had to do it. She never avoided eye contact, but even in that case she would have to change. And now, standing in front of the Empress, the girl did everything according to the rules. Deborah bowed her head and said that it was an honor to serve the noblest lady in the empire. After a brief hesitation, the Empress called her interlocutor by name. The maid confirmed that her name was Deborah Carter and repeated her words again. Suddenly, the girl noticed that the Empress fell to her knees in front of her. Deborah remembered that she was not allowed to look His Majesty in the eyes, but noticing the tears on Liana's face. The girl could not restrain herself. Deborah reached out her hand towards the Empress's face, wanting to wipe away her tears. And in the end, all of Carter's efforts were thwarted only by His Majesty's tears. Already sitting at the table in the courtyard, the girls called Annie. The girl tried to introduce herself according to the rules, but they immediately decided to stop her just in case. Deborah told how recently Liana made a sad face and shed tears while screaming. Laughing, the Empress invited Annie to sit at the table with them. Looking at her friends, the girl realized that the atmosphere was much warmer than she expected. But Annie still had doubts, because Liana is the Empress and they are only the family's maids. But an hour later, the girl was freed from all thoughts and only the screams of the Empress's stories remained. Deborah, as disgusted as Annie herself, expressed her opinion on how treacherous the aristocrats were. But suddenly, both girls fell silent, remembering that their friend was now an aristocrat. Unlike them, they awkwardly started making excuses that Zuliana was an exception. But Deborah still did not understand how the Empress could cheerfully talk about such a terrible teacher. The Empress admitted that many things had happened during this time, but that everything was fine now. After all, now Deborah and Annie are by her side in the palace. But the Empress still could not understand how they could settle in the palace. Deborah said that the Emperor himself ordered her to do this and behave well. After which, the Empress realized that they could not reply to her letter due to training. The girl admitted that she was already scared, believing that this way they decided to end all their friendship. Deborah immediately screamed, not understanding how Liana could even think of such a thing. To herself, she remembered that she thought the Empress had forgotten them. If Liana's life had been prosperous, Deborah would have simply forgotten about her. Resentful. But in reality, everything turned out to be completely different from what Carter had imagined. Annie decided to call the Empress and began to ask her if she knew about the fate of her former mistress. After all, having become a commoner, Miss Natasha opened her own boutique. It is so popular that there are even rumors about it, and they asked Deborah to confirm it with a knowing wink. The girl exhaled and said that she was very surprised when she heard the news. The Empress believed that since it was Natasha, she would surely succeed. Suddenly, Deborah wondered how Liana should call Natasha Miss now. The Empress dismissed it and explained that there was no need to pay attention to such things. Deborah looked at Annie laughing, knowing that they would definitely do everything possible to help Liana. And Carter would not do anything she would later regret. Something the girl thought about again and again.